A 75-year-old farmer, 6 armed killers, 10 heartbeats. 5 men dropped before they could blink. The sixth fell to his knees and whispered one word: shade. She wasn't just a farmer, she was a ghost, a legend, a weapon forged in Vietnam and broken by a massacre that killed 3 children. For 57 years, one man hunted her. Today, she hunts back. Before we dive into this story, drop a like if you are ready for this ride. Subscribe if you haven't already, and comment below where in the world are you watching from right now. I read every single one. Now, let's begin. The gunshot echoed across the plateau like a crack of thunder splitting the Montana sky. 5 men dropped in the span of 10 heartbeats, their weapons clattering against the hard-packed dirt of Eleanor Hayes's farm. The woman standing at the center of the carnage held 2 gleaming Remington revolvers, smoke curling from their barrels, like morning fog lifting off the Iron Ridge Mountains. Connor Walsh, the sixth gunman, collapsed to his knees, clutching his shattered wrist. Blood seeped between his fingers as he stared up at the woman who had just dismantled his entire crew with the cold precision of a surgeon and the speed of a lightning strike. His voice came out as a broken whisper, half prayer and half curse. "You're the legend, the shade." Eleanor Hayes stepped forward, her boots crunching on scattered shell casings. The late afternoon sun caught the jagged scar running from her left temple to her jaw, a permanent reminder of battles fought in another lifetime. Her gray eyes cold as winter steel locked onto Connor's face. "Tell Marcus Stone this land is not for sale." The Remingtons never wavered. The message was delivered. 3 days earlier, those same gray eyes had been watching the dawn break over Ridge Valley from the porch of a weathered cabin perched on the highest plateau in Montana. Eleanor Hayes, 75 years old and bone-weary from decades of violence, had spent the last 5 years trying to bury her past beneath rows of vegetables and healing herbs. The farm was small, barely 200 acres of stubborn soil that fought back against every seed planted. But it was hers. And more importantly, it was isolated. Isolation meant safety. Isolation meant distance from the ghosts that followed her. The morning routine never changed. Check the perimeter, scan the tree line with military-grade binoculars, count the game trails leading up from the valley below. Old habits from another life when being caught unprepared meant being carried out in a body bag. Eleanor moved through these rituals with the practiced efficiency of someone who had survived by never trusting the quiet. The cabin itself told a story to anyone trained to read it. 3 separate escape routes, each one carefully maintained and memorized. Windows positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire. A Winchester rifle hanging innocently beside the door, always loaded, always within reach. And beneath the floorboards, hidden in a heavy oak chest, the tools of her former trade waited in oiled silence. 2 custom Remington revolvers, a scarred Winchester, boxes of ammunition, a folded leather warrant marked with the seal of the United States Marshal Service. And underneath it all, a thick stack of yellowed newspaper clippings, their headlines whispering pieces of a legend the world believed dead. Legendary Marshall shatters, Hawkins gang, 12 outlaws fall in federal gunfight. Marshall shade vanishes after courthouse massacre. Eleanor never looked at those clippings anymore. Looking back meant remembering, and remembering meant counting faces. 27 faces to be exact. 27 men she had killed over 12 years of service. Every shot legal, every target confirmed. Every kill investigated and ruled justified use of force. But justification did not equal absolution. The sound of hoofbeats broke her morning meditation. Eleanor's hand moved instinctively toward the Winchester before her conscious mind registered the movement. She was standing at the rifle when young Finn Baker came trotting up the trail on his spotted mare saddlebags bulging with supplies from town. Finn was 16, all gangly limbs and earnest enthusiasm, working part-time at the general store to help his widowed mother make ends meet. Once a week, he made the brutal climb up to Eleanor's plateau to deliver supplies and collect her produce for sale in Ashford. The boy had taken to the work with surprising dedication, and over the past year, Lanner had found herself teaching him skills that had nothing to do with farming. How to read tracks in soft earth, how to purify water, how to navigate by stars when the clouds rolled in thick. Basic survival skills, she told herself, nothing more. "Morning, Miss Hayes," Finn called out, swinging down from the saddle with youthful grace. "Brought your flour and salt. Mrs. Reed says your lavender soap is selling faster than she can stock it. Eleanor accepted the supplies with a nod, her eyes automatically scanning the trail behind him. Empty. Nothing but wind and dust. You see anything unusual coming up? She asked. Finn shook his head. Just the usual, though folks in town are talking. Marcus Stone's men have been asking questions about this plateau. About you. Something cold settled in Eleanor's gut. Marcus Stone, she knew the name. Everyone in Ridge Valley knew Marcus Stone. He controlled the eastern half of the valley through a combination of legitimate business and barely legal intimidation. If Stone was asking questions, it meant trouble was circling. What kind of questions? About how long you've been here, where you came from, why a woman alone would choose to live so far from town. Finn's young face creased with concern. Miss Hayes, are you in some kind of trouble? Eleanor considered lying. It would be easier. But this boy deserved better than convenient fiction. Trouble has a way of finding certain people, Finn, no matter how far they run. She handed him a basket of fresh vegetables. Tell your mother I appreciate her concern. And Finn, if you see strangers on this trail, any strangers, you turn that mare around and ride hard for town. Understand? The boy nodded, but his eyes held questions. Eleanor could see him trying to reconcile the quiet farmer who taught him about healing herbs with the woman whose tone had just dropped to something flat and dangerous. After Finn departed, Eleanor stood on her porch for a long time watching the tree line. The wind carried the scent of pine and distant rain, but underneath it, something else. A wrongness in the air. The kind of stillness that preceded violence. She was still standing there when 6 riders emerged from the forest an hour later. They came with the swagger of men who believed their authority was absolute. 6 horses, 6 men, all wearing the hard faces of professional enforcers. The leader rode a black stallion that probably cost more than most families earned in a year. A red bandana circled his throat, and a silver-handled revolver gleamed at his hip. Jack Garrett, Marcus Stone's chief enforcer, and the closest thing Ridge Valley had to an official executioner. Eleanor set down her gardening tools and straightened slowly, brushing dirt from her worn work pants. Her posture was relaxed, but every muscle in her body had shifted to high alert. The cabin was 30 feet away. The Winchester was inside. The Remingtons were locked in the chest. She was, for all practical purposes, unarmed. Jack Garrett dismounted with theatrical flourish, his boots hitting the ground with deliberate force. Behind him, the 5 other riders spread out in a loose semicircle, hands resting near their weapons. Professional positioning. These were not simple thugs. That's some mighty fine land you've got hidden up here, Jack called out, his voice carrying the false friendliness of a predator playing with wounded prey. Marcus Stone sends his regards. He's mighty interested in buying this patch for his new railroad line. Eleanor's face revealed nothing. Not interested in selling. Please leave my land. Jack's smile stiffened. The other riders shifted, hands drifting toward their guns. The afternoon light caught on metal, creating shadows that danced across the dusty ground. Now hold on, that ain't how it works. The gold tooth in Jack's grin flashed. Mr. Stone is offering $300, real generous for dirt this far from town. This land isn't for sale at any price. Eleanor turned back to her seedlings, dismissing them. If you'll excuse me, these won't survive long out of the ground. It happened fast. Jack stepped forward and deliberately ground his boot heel into a freshly planted row, crushing young tomato plants beneath his weight. The act of casual destruction was meant to provoke, to establish dominance. It succeeded in the first, failed spectacularly in the second. Eleanor moved. One instant she was crouched over her garden. The next she had Jack's arm wrenched behind him, his own knife pressed tight against his throat. A thin red line appeared where the blade kissed skin. The mounted men reached for their weapons, but froze as they watched their leader become a hostage in the space of a single heartbeat. I don't want trouble, Eleanor said calmly, her voice unchanged from moments before. But this is my home. I won't be threatened on it. She disarmed Jack with practiced efficiency, tossing his knife into the dirt, and shoved him backward. Before anyone could react, she had already created 3 steps of distance, her body coiled and ready. The casual way she held herself, the complete absence of fear in her eyes, spoke volumes to men who live by reading such things. You've made a big mistake, Jack snarled, rubbing his throat where blood trickled down to stain at his collar. Nobody turns down Stone. Nobody humiliates Jack Garrett. We'll be back, farmer. And next time, we won't be so polite. Eleanor watched them ride away until the forest swallowed them whole. Only then did her shoulders relax slightly. Her hands, she noted with distant satisfaction, had not trembled once. That was good. It meant the muscle memory was still there, buried under 5 years of pretending to be someone else. Inside the cabin, she knelt before the oak chest and turned the key that hung on a leather cord around her neck. The lid opened with a creak of old hinges, revealing the tools of her former life. She lifted one of the Remingtons, feeling its familiar weight settle into her palm like an old friend returning home. 57 years. That was how long ago she had first learned to shoot. The memory came unbidden, sharp as broken glass. Vietnam, July 1968. Highway 1, where the jungle met the road and death waited in both. Augustus Gray, 18 years old and 3 months into her first combat deployment, crouched behind a burning Jeep while bullets tore the air above her head. The ambush had come from nowhere, turning a routine supply run into a slaughter. 12 soldiers in the convoy. 4 still alive, pinned down and bleeding. Among them, Dr. Benjamin Miller, the unit's combat medic, trapped beneath an overturned supply truck. The military had accepted Augustus Gray's enlistment without question. In 1968, the draft was hungry, and a young person from rural Montana with excellent marksmanship scores asked few questions about the private who kept to himself and never showered with the others. Augustus had secrets, but in the chaos of war, everyone had secrets. "Leave me," Miller screamed from beneath the wreckage. "Save yourself, kid." Augustus moved through the gunfire with the strange calm that would later define her legend. Not fearless. Fear was there, sharp and bright, but it moved through her rather than stopping her. She reached Miller, grabbed him by his webbing, and dragged all 200 pounds of him out from under the truck through sheer desperate strength. They made it to cover somehow. Miller stared at her with wide eyes. "You've got the coldest eyes I've ever seen, Gray," he said between gasps of pain. "But the warmest heart." Augustus did not respond. She was too busy reloading her M16, her hands steady despite the terror singing through her veins. 3 months later, Augustus lay in a field hospital with a face split open by shrapnel. The scar would never fully heal, a permanent record carved from temple to jaw. Miller sat beside the bed every day, changing bandages and telling stories to fill the silence. "War doesn't end when you leave the battlefield. Gray," he said one evening, as morphine dragged Augustus towards sleep. "It follows you home, lives in your dreams. The ones who survive learn to carry it, but it never truly leaves." He was right. Augustus Gray came home from Vietnam in 1970, 20 years old and irrevocably changed. The nightmares came every night. The same dream on repeat, her squad torn apart by that ambush, their faces frozen in the moment of death. She would wake gasping hands reaching for a rifle that was not there. The military offered counseling. Augustus attended 3 sessions before realizing that talking about it only made the ghosts more real. So she stopped talking, started moving, joined the United States Marshal Service in 1972 because it was the only work she knew, the only thing that made sense in a world that had stopped making sense. By 1975, Augustus Gray had earned a different name: Shade, the Ghost Marshal. 18 confirmed kills in 3 years, every one of them clean. No missed shots, no collateral damage, no bystanders caught in the crossfire, but also no peace. White Ridge Courthouse, 2018. That was where Augustus Gray finally died. The Dawson brothers had been on trial for murder when their gang attempted a jailbreak. Augustus, assigned to courtroom security, had stopped them. All 4 Dawson brothers went down in the firefight, but so did 7 civilians caught in the crossfire, 3 of them children. The official report called it justified. The investigation cleared Augustus of wrongdoing. The Marshal Service offered a commendation. Augustus Gray handed in her badge and vanished. 7 years of silence followed. 7 years of drifting from town to town, trying to find a place where the ghost could not follow. And then Governor Edgar Knox had found her tending bar in a forgotten corner of Idaho and had made an offer. "I need someone I can trust," Knox had said. "Someone with your skills. Ridge Valley is about to become a battlefield, and I need eyes on the ground. Go there. Become someone else. Watch. Wait. And when the time comes, stop the bloodshed before it starts." Eleanor Hayes had been born from that conversation. A quiet farmer with a mysterious past buying an isolated plot of land from an old trapper who asked no questions. 5 years of growing vegetables and healing herbs, becoming part of the valley's landscape while watching for the signs Knox had warned about. And now those signs had arrived on her doorstep wearing a red bandana and a gold tooth. Eleanor closed the chest and locked it again, but she moved the Winchester from its place by the door to leaning against the wall beside her bed, close enough to reach in the dark, just in case. She was preparing dinner when Dr. Benjamin Miller's wagon rattled up the trail. Miller had aged into his 70s with surprising grace. His hair had gone completely white, but his hands remained steady and his eyes sharp. He had found her 6 months after she settled in Ridge Valley, recognizing Augustus Gray beneath Eleanor Hayes's disguise, despite the decades and the changed appearance. They had not spoken of Vietnam since that day. Some things were better left in the past, until the past came looking. "I heard about Jack Garrett's visit," Miller said without preamble, accepting the cup of chamomile tea Eleanor offered. "Word travels fast in small towns. I handled it. That's what concerns me." Miller set down his cup and fixed her with the same penetrating stare he had used in that field hospital 57 years ago. "Augustus, Eleanor, whoever you're being today, Connor Walsh is coming." The name hit like a physical blow. Eleanor's hand tightened on her own cup hard enough that the ceramic creaked. "Connor Walsh," she repeated slowly. "Relation to the Dawsons. First cousin, son of Ethan Walsh, who raised the Dawson brothers after their parents died. Connor was 33 when you killed them at White Ridge. He's been hunting you ever since." Eleanor set down her cup before it shattered. "He knows I'm here." Marcus Stone showed him an old wanted poster. Connor recognized the scar. Miller reached into his medical bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. "Knox said to give you this when the time came." The envelope was heavy official. Eleanor broke the seal with trembling fingers and unfolded papers that smelled of old tobacco and government offices. The first item was a letter in Governor Knox's distinctive handwriting. "Dear Augustus/Eleanor, if Dr. Miller gives you this letter, it means the time has come. 5 years ago, I placed you in Ridge Valley for Operation Sentinel to monitor Harrison Drake's activities. Drake has orchestrated 5 land wars across Western territories. Ridge Valley is his final target. Your mission, prevent bloodshed, expose Drake, protect the lithium deposit from falling into corrupt hands. Enclosed your badge, your authority as Special Territorial Investigator. And one more thing, trust Rebecca Cole. She's one of ours. Godspeed, old friend. Edgar Knox, Governor of Montana." Beneath the letter lay her old badge, number 247. The metal was tarnished, but still solid, still real. And beneath that, a photograph yellowed with age. Augustus Gray at 25, standing beside a much younger Edgar Knox at some forgotten ceremony, both of them wearing the kind of smiles people wore before the world taught them better. 5 years, Eleanor whispered. "I thought I was retired, but I was just deep cover the whole time." "Knox always played the long game," Miller said gently. "He knew Drake would eventually target the lithium here. He needed someone who could recognize the pattern, someone who could act when the time came, someone the Valley wouldn't see coming." "And Rebecca Cole?" Eleanor asked, pointing to the name in the letter. Miller's expression softened. "You saved her family at Henderson County. Thomas Cole, your partner, for 6 years. He survived that day thanks to you, but died a year later in 2010, taking a bullet meant for a witness in Cameron County. Rebecca is his daughter. She works for Catherine Grant, but her real loyalty is to Knox. And to you, whether she knows it yet or not." Eleanor stood and walked to the window, staring out at the valley below where lights were beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. Somewhere down there, Connor Walsh was sharpening his knives and planning her death. Somewhere Harrison Drake was moving pieces on a board she was only beginning to see. And somewhere a young woman named Rebecca Cole was walking toward danger without knowing allies surrounded her. "I tried to bury shade," Eleanor said to her reflection in the glass. "I tried to become someone who grew things instead of killed them." "You did grow things," Miller replied. "You've been growing this community's future for 5 years. Now it's time to protect what you've planted." Eleanor turned from the window. In the fading light, with her scar cast in shadow and her gray eyes harder than stone, she looked less like a farmer and more like exactly what she was. A weapon that had been waiting in careful storage, oiled and maintained, ready for the moment it would be needed again. Tell me everything you know about Connor Walsh. Miller spent the next hour laying out the intelligence. Connor Walsh, 22 years old, had built a reputation as one of the most dangerous guns for hire in 5 states. His crew, called the Wolves, specialized in intimidation and assassination. They were expensive, professional, and utterly without mercy. Marcus Stone hiring them meant this was not just about land acquisition anymore. This was about removing an obstacle permanently. He's bringing 6 men, Miller said, all ex-military. They'll come at dawn or dusk when the light works against you. They'll try to box you in, cut off escape routes. Connor's smart. He's been planning this for 7 years. Then I have tonight to prepare. Eleanor was already moving her mind, shifting into tactical mode she had not accessed in years. I need you to do something for me, Doc. Name it. Take this. She pressed the old dog tag he had given her in Vietnam into his palm. If I don't survive tomorrow, get this to Knox. He'll know what it means. And Doc, thank you for everything, for saving me then, for finding me now. Miller's eyes glistened. Don't thank me yet. Survive first. After Miller departed, Eleanor spent the night preparing. She cleaned both Remingtons with ritual care, checking every mechanism, loading fresh ammunition. The Winchester received the same attention. She packed an emergency bag with medical supplies, water, ammunition, and cash. She checked and rechecked her escape routes, ensuring each path was clear and memorized. And in the darkest hour before dawn, she allowed herself one moment of weakness. She took out the old newspaper clippings and read through them one final time. 27 names, 27 faces, 27 ghosts who had earned their deaths but haunted her anyway. I'm sorry, she whispered to them. I tried to stop, but they won't let me. The sunrise found Eleanor standing in her garden, ostensibly working on the tomato plants Jack Garrett had destroyed. But her hands moved on autopilot while her eyes constantly scanned the tree line. The Winchester leaned against the cabin wall 10 feet away. The Remingtons rested in shoulder holsters beneath her loose work shirt, hidden but accessible. Rebecca Cole arrived first, riding up the trail on a dappled gray mare just as the morning mist began to lift. She was 31, with brown hair pulled back in a practical braid and eyes the color of Montana sky. She dressed like a proper lady, but Eleanor's trained gaze caught the slight bulge beneath her sleeve, where a derringer hid the unnatural stiffness of her skirt, where a revolver hung in a concealed holster. Miss Hayes, Rebecca called out, dismounting with fluid grace. I'm Rebecca Cole, assistant to Catherine Grant. I was hoping you might have some of your headache remedy, the lavender tonic you sell in town. A cover story. Eleanor appreciated the craft in it. Of course, won't you come in for tea? Inside the cabin, with the door closed and curtains drawn, Eleanor poured 2 cups of chamomile while Rebecca examined the space with the same careful attention Eleanor had used on her. 2 professionals sizing each other up. You can drop the act, Eleanor said quietly. Knox sent word about you. Rebecca's hand moved toward her sleeve, then stopped as Eleanor raised empty palms. I'm not your enemy, Eleanor continued. Show me Knox's letter, and I'll show you mine. They exchanged envelopes like card players, revealing their hands. Rebecca's letter was shorter but carried the same message: trust Eleanor Hayes. She was Augustus Gray. She was the shade. Rebecca's eyes went wide as she read. When she looked up, her expression had shifted from cautious professional to something deeper, something personal. You're the one who saved my father, she said softly. Henderson County, 2015. Thomas Cole. He wrote about you in his letters. Said you pulled him out of a burning building, took a bullet meant for him. He always called you Gus. Tom was a good man, Eleanor replied, her throat tight. One of the best partners I ever had. When he died, I felt like I lost a brother. He said the same about you. The last thing he told me before he died was, if you ever meet Augustus Gray, tell him I never forgot. Tell him I owed him everything. Rebecca's voice cracked. I didn't know you were a woman. He never said. I don't think he knew. Very few people did. It was easier that way. And now, Rebecca gestured at the cabin, the farm, the carefully constructed life. Eleanor Hayes is who I needed to become to stay alive and stay sane. Eleanor refilled their cups. Your turn. What's Catherine Grant's real interest in this plateau? Rebecca laid out what she knew. Catherine Grant, widow of Richard Grant, had built one of the most successful freight operations in Montana. But recently she had become obsessed with the Northern Mountain Pass, the very route that ran through Eleanor's plateau. Marcus Stone wanted the same pass for his railroad expansion. Both of them were locked in a Cold War that threatened to heat up any moment. What neither of them knows, Rebecca said, leaning forward, is that Harrison Drake has been playing them against each other, feeding Marcus information that Catherine is planning to block his railroad, telling Catherine that Marcus is trying to seize her northern shipping routes. Drake wants them to destroy each other so he can swoop in and claim the lithium rights under emergency territorial laws. Lithium, Eleanor repeated. Knox mentioned it in his letter. What makes it so valuable? New geological survey 6 months ago. This valley sits on the largest lithium deposit in North America, maybe the world, worth $50 billion. Whoever controls the mountain pass controls access to the entire deposit. That's why Drake wants you gone. You're literally sitting on the key to an empire. Eleanor absorbed this, pieces clicking into place. And Connor Walsh, hired 3 days ago, $500 per man to remove you from the plateau. Drake must have told Marcus you were a threat. Marcus doesn't know you're shade. He just thinks you're a stubborn farmer standing in the way of progress. He's going to learn different very soon. Eleanor stood and walked to the window. Connor's bringing 6 men. They'll be here within the hour. Dawn attack. He'll try to box me in, burn me out. But Connor has one weakness. He's angry. His cousins died 7 years ago, and he's been nursing that rage ever since. Angry people make mistakes. I can help, Rebecca said immediately. I was top of my class at Pinkerton Academy. I can shoot, I can fight. Let me stand with you. Eleanor studied the younger woman, saw her father's determination in the set of her jaw, his courage in the straightness of her spine. Tom Cole had been one of the few marshals who treated Augustus Gray as an equal, never questioning, never judging. He had died taking a bullet meant for someone else, died a hero. His daughter deserved the truth. If you stay, people are going to die, Eleanor said bluntly. I'm very good at killing, Rebecca. It's the one thing I've always been good at. And when Connor comes, I'm going to use every bit of that skill to make sure he doesn't leave this plateau alive. If you can't live with that ride down the mountain now, no judgment, no shame. Rebecca met her gaze without flinching. My father taught me that sometimes good people have to do hard things to protect those who can't protect themselves. Connor Walsh and his wolves have terrorized this valley for years. If today is the day that ends, I want to be part of it. Eleanor held out her hand. Rebecca took it. The grip was firm, callous, the handshake of someone who had earned their strength. Welcome to the fight, Marshall's daughter. They were still planning when the hoofbeats came. 6 riders emerging from the tree line, spreading out in practice formation. Connor Walsh in the center, older and harder than his cousins, had been carrying the same rage they had died with. He stopped 50 yards from the cabin and stood in his stirrups. Shade. His voice echoed across the plateau. I know who you are. I know what you did. Today I settle the score for my family. Eleanor stepped out of the cabin, empty-handed, the morning sun behind her turning her into a silhouette. Rebecca moved to the window with the Winchester covering the approach. Your cousins killed innocent people, Eleanor called back, her voice carrying the flat certainty of absolute truth. Children, Connor. They shot children. They earned what they got. Liar, Connor's face twisted with fury. They were defending themselves. You murdered them. I was doing my job, and now you're making me do it again. Connor raised his hand. The 6 riders fanned out, 2 flanking left, 2 flanking right. Connor and 1 backup straight ahead. Professional formation. Military precision. These were not simple thugs. They were trained soldiers, turned killers. Last chance, Shade, Connor shouted. Come out and face me alone, or we burn everything you've built. Eleanor's response was to let her work shirt fall open, revealing the 2 Remingtons holstered beneath. The message was clear. Come and try. Connor's hand dropped. The wolves charged. What happened next would later be described as poetry written in gunpowder and blood. Eleanor moved with the fluid grace of someone for whom violence was not just a skill, but a native language. The first shot came from Rebecca, the Winchester's crack, splitting the air as the left flanker took a bullet to the shoulder and tumbled from his saddle. Eleanor was already moving. Both Remingtons cleared leather in a single smooth draw. The world narrowed to targets and trajectories, breathing and timing. Her first two shots dropped the forward rider's precision hits to the shoulder and thigh that disabled without killing. Connor fired his shotgun, but Eleanor had already rolled behind the water trough, the heavy wood-absorbing pellets that would have torn her apart. The wolves were good. They adapted fast, splitting up, using cover, laying down, suppressing fire. But Eleanor was better. She had been doing this since before some of them were born. She moved like smoke, appearing where they did not expect, firing from angles they could not predict. Each shot found its mark. Each target went down. The right flanker tried to flank Rebecca's position. Rebecca's second shot caught him in the leg, spinning him around. The backup rider charged the cabin. Eleanor's shot shattered his rifle stock, sending splinters into his face. He screamed and fell. In 10 seconds, 5 of the 6 wolves were down. Not dead. Eleanor had been careful about that. Each shot precisely placed to disable, to wound, to stop without killing. Because killing was easy, restraint was hard. And Eleanor had spent 5 years learning to choose the hard path. Only Connor remained crouched behind a barrel, blood streaming from where wood splinters had sliced his face. His shotgun was empty. His revolver was in his hand, but his hand was shaking. The rage that had sustained him for 7 years suddenly met its match in cold terror. "You took everything from me," he screamed. Eleanor stood from behind the trough, both Remingtons trained on him with absolute steadiness. "Your cousins took themselves from you when they chose to murder innocents. I just stopped them from killing more." Connor fired wild. Eleanor sidestepped with minimal effort, a simple shift of weight that moved her out of the bullet's path. Her return shots were surgical. The first took Connor's gun hand, the revolver spinning away. The second clipped his shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to his knees. Eleanor walked forward slowly, kicking the fallen weapons aside, and pressed her boot against Connor's wounded shoulder. He screamed. "You're going to tell me everything," she said quietly, "about Marcus Stone, about Harrison Drake, about why you really came here." Connor laughed through his pain, a broken sound. "You think Marcus is the enemy? He's just a pawn. Drake orchestrated everything. White Ridge, too. He wanted those kids dead. He wanted you destroyed." Eleanor's boot pressed harder. "Explain." Between gasps of agony, Connor laid it out. Harrison Drake had been planning Ridge Valley's takeover for 2 years. He had orchestrated the tensions between Marcus Stone and Catherine Grant, feeding them false information, manipulating them toward inevitable conflict. And 7 years ago, he had orchestrated the White Ridge attack because Augustus Gray was investigating his operations in Cameron County. The Dawson brothers had not acted alone. They had been hired, paid to create chaos, paid to kill the marshal who was getting too close to the truth. The children who died had not been collateral damage. They had been bait. Drake wanted to break shade, and it had worked. Augustus Gray had disappeared, and Drake's operations had continued unchallenged for 7 years, until now. "Drake was in Vietnam," Connor gasped. 1968. CIA liaison. He knew you back then. Knew Augustus Gray exposed his war crimes. He's been hunting you for 57 years. The memory hit Eleanor like a physical blow. A face she had not thought about in decades, suddenly clear as yesterday. A CIA operative in expensive suits who had ordered the napalming of villages suspected of harboring Viet Cong. Augustus Gray, young and idealistic and still believing the system worked, had reported him. The investigation had gone nowhere, buried under classification and political pressure. But the man had looked at Augustus with eyes full of cold promise. "You'll regret this, Gray. I'll destroy you." Harrison Drake had been keeping that promise for 57 years. Eleanor removed her boot from Connor's shoulder and stepped back. Rebecca emerged from the cabin, Winchester still ready, surveying the scene with professional assessment. 5 wounded men scattered across the clearing, not one of them dead. "Mercy," Rebecca said softly. "You could have killed them all." "I've killed enough people for 3 lifetimes," Eleanor replied. "These men are soldiers following orders. It's the man giving orders who needs to answer for this." She zip-tied Connor's hands and started binding the other wounds with practiced efficiency. Dr. Miller would arrive soon to do proper medical work, but she could stabilize them until then. As she worked, her mind raced ahead to the next move. Drake knew about her now. Marcus and Catherine were still being manipulated toward war. And somewhere in the valley below, innocents were about to be caught in crossfire they did not deserve. White Ridge could not happen again. The sound of hoofbeats made both women spin weapons ready, but it was young Finn Baker galloping up the trail on his mare, the horse foaming and wild-eyed with exertion. The boy practically fell from the saddle. "Miss Hayes," his voice cracked with panic and youth. "The town is burning. Marcus Stone's men and Catherine Grant's guards are killing each other. Dr. Miller sent me to warn you." Eleanor and Rebecca exchanged a single look that said everything. They had run out of time. "What started it?" Eleanor demanded. "Someone poisoned the water at Iron Horse Saloon. Marcus says it was Catherine. Catherine says it's a lie. Then Jack Garrett shot one of Catherine's guards. Said she was poisoning the well. After that, everyone just started shooting. The whole town's gone crazy." Eleanor strode to her cabin and threw open the oak chest. This time she did not hesitate. She pulled out both Remingtons, the Winchester boxes of ammunition, and the old leather coat she had not worn in 7 years. The coat from her martial days, scarred and weathered and stained with memories. She pinned the badge to the coat's chest. Number 247. Let them see it. Let them know what was coming. "Finn," she said, her voice carrying command that made the boy straighten instinctively. "Listen carefully. Ride to Owen Stone's ranch. He's Marcus's cousin, owns the biggest spread in the valley. Tell him Eleanor Hayes needs every man he can spare at Ashford within the hour. Tell him the shade has returned and Ridge Valley needs defending." "Owen Stone will come for you?" Finn asked, awed and terrified in equal measure. "He'll come. Owen knows what's really at stake here." Eleanor turned to Rebecca, seeing her father's courage burning in the younger woman's eyes. "You ready for this? My father died protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. If this is my turn to stand that line, I'm ready." Eleanor held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. She looked at Finn one more time. "Your last name?" "Baker. Your father was Thomas Baker." Finn blinked in surprise. "Yes, ma'am. He died when I was 6. Mom said he was a marshal, but she never talked much about it." Eleanor's chest tightened. Thomas Baker. She had known him briefly during her marshal days, a good man who died in the line of duty, leaving behind a widow and young son. Another ghost to add to the collection. "Tom Baker was my partner and my friend. He was one of the best men I ever knew. And Finn, he talked about you in his letters, about his son, about wanting to teach you everything he knew about being a good man in a hard world. He loved you more than anything." Tears tracked through the dust on Finn's face. "He wrote about someone named Gus, said Gus was the bravest person he ever met. That was you. That was who I used to be. Your father saved my life more times than I can count. I owe him everything." Eleanor gripped the boy's shoulder. "So I'm going to make you a promise. I'm going to save this town your father loved. I'm going to stop the people who profit from violence and suffering. And when this is over, if you want, I'll teach you everything your father would have taught you. Starting with the most important lesson. Stand for what's right even when standing alone. Remember that." Finn nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging his throat. He mounted his mare and rode hard for Owen Stone's ranch. Eleanor watched him go, then turned to face the valley below. Smoke rose from multiple locations in Ashford. The sound of distant gunfire crackled like fireworks. People were dying down there. Innocents were caught in a war they never asked for. Not again. Never again. She mounted her horse, Rebecca beside her on the gray mare. They rode toward the chaos, toward the fire, toward whatever waited in the town below. The setting sun caught on Eleanor's badge, making it flare like a signal. The shade had returned, and this time she was not hunting criminals. She was hunting the man who had made her into a weapon and then broken her for daring to be more than what he wanted. Harrison Drake's 57-year hunt was about to meet its conclusion. The ride down the mountain took 2 hours through trails only Eleanor knew. Every minute brought them closer to the sounds of violence, the smell of smoke growing thicker as they descended. At the church on the edge of town, they found Dr. Miller treating 12 wounded townspeople, his white hair gray with ash, his hands red with other people's blood. "Catherine Grant is trapped at the trading company," he said without preamble. "Second floor, building's on fire. Marcus Stone's men have it surrounded. Sheriff Tucker tried to negotiate a ceasefire. Marcus arrested him for treason, says Tucker was on Catherine's payroll all along." Eleanor studied the town from the church steps. Ashford had become a war zone. Barricades divided the main street. Armed men crouched behind cover trading shots. Civilians huddled in basements and cellars praying the bullets would miss. This was White Ridge all over again, except this time Eleanor had arrived before the children died. She could still stop this. "The rooftops," she said. "Rebecca, can you do parkour?" Rebecca's smile was fierce. "Pinkerton Academy Advanced Urban Navigation. I was top of my class." "Then we go over them, not through them. Save Catherine first. Then Tucker. Then we end this war before anyone else dies." They left their horses with Miller and moved into Ashford's shadow. The night had fallen completely now, providing cover, but also danger. They scaled the church's rear wall using drainage pipes, reaching the roof in silence. Before them, the town spread out like a game board rooftops, forming an irregular path toward the burning trading company. Eleanor produced a grappling hook from her pack, the same one she had carried through a dozen operations in her marshal days. She set it across the 20-foot gap between church and mercantile, tested the line, and gestured for Rebecca to cross first. The younger woman crossed without hesitation, balance perfect, no fear visible in her movements. Eleanor followed, pulling the rope after them. They moved from rooftop to rooftop, two ghosts in the night, unseen by the men focused on the battle below. At the bank roof, they found Jack Garrett manning a sniper position. He was so focused on the street below that he did not hear them approach until Eleanor's hand closed on his shoulder and spun him around. She had the rifle out of his hands before he could shout. "Going to kill me?" Jack asked, defiant despite the fear in his eyes. "Not unless you make me." Eleanor studied him. "You're taking orders from Marcus Stone. Marcus is taking orders from Harrison Drake. And Drake is playing everyone. The water wasn't poisoned by Catherine. It was poisoned by Drake's men to start exactly this war. You've been manipulated, Jack. Just like everyone else." Jack's expression shifted as he processed this. He was not stupid. He had seen too many convenient coincidences, too many perfectly timed provocations. He just had not wanted to see the pattern. "Prove it," he said finally. Eleanor did not have proof, not yet. But she had something better. She had truth spoken with the absolute certainty of someone who had dedicated their life to seeing through lies. "When this is over, when we've saved your boss and Catherine Grant and stopped this town from tearing itself apart, I'll show you Drake's operation. I'll show you the documents proving he orchestrated 5 land wars across 5 territories. And then you'll have to decide what kind of man you want to be. The kind who keeps following orders when those orders are evil. Or the kind who stands up and says enough." Jack stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he set down his weapons. "Go save them," he said quietly. "I'll make sure no one comes up here while you work." Eleanor and Rebecca left him there and continued across the rooftops until they reached the trading company. The second floor was fully engulfed now, flames licking out of broken windows. But through the smoke, Eleanor could see movement in the corner office. Catherine Grant trapped wounded, running out of time. They dropped through a skylight into a storeroom, the smoke immediately burning their lungs and eyes. Rebecca pulled cloth from her pack, soaking it with water from her canteen to create makeshift masks. They moved through the choking darkness by touch and memory, feeling their way toward the office. 3 of Marcus's men guarded the office door, coughing in the smoke, but determined to complete their orders. Rebecca created the diversion, firing her revolver into a crate that exploded in a shower of packing material and noise. The 3 guards spun toward the sound. Eleanor breached from the opposite side, taking down the first guard with an elbow to the temple, disarming the second before he could react and ducking under the third's wild swing to deliver a knee that folded him in half. She kicked open the office door. Catherine Grant sat against the far wall, her leg clearly broken, face pale with shock and blood loss. She looked up at Eleanor with eyes that expected death. "Who are you?" Catherine gasped. Eleanor hauled her up in a fireman's carry. "Someone who's tired of watching good people die for bad men's greed." "Hold on." They escaped through a back window as the ceiling began to collapse, landing in an alley where Rebecca had positioned their horses. They rode hard for the church, Catherine clinging to consciousness through sheer will. Dr. Miller immediately began treating her broken leg, while Eleanor and Rebecca prepared for Phase 2. Iron Horse Saloon, Sheriff Tucker, and the first face-to-face confrontation with the man who had orchestrated all of this. They approached the saloon from the rear, moving through the same kind of shadow and silence that had defined Eleanor's career. The explosive device she planted at the front entrance was small, noisy, and completely non-lethal. It existed for one purpose: distraction. When it detonated, 8 of the 10 guards rushed to investigate. Eleanor and Rebecca breached through the back, moving through the storeroom like smoke reaching the office door, just as the last 2 guards realized their mistake. The door splintered under Eleanor's kick. Inside, the scene froze like a photograph Marcus Stone hand on his holster, turning in surprise. Jack Garrett, who had come down from his rooftop, weapon lowering in relief. 2 guards' rifles half raised. Sheriff Tucker tied to a chair, face bruised, but defiant. And standing in the corner, wearing an expensive suit in an expression of mild amusement, Harrison Drake himself. Eleanor's Remingtons were aimed at Drake's heart before anyone else could move. "Hello, Augustus," Drake said pleasantly, as if they were meeting for tea rather than a reckoning 57 years in the making. "How delightful. After all this time, we finally meet again." "Vietnam," Eleanor said flatly. "You ordered the massacre at My Lai. I reported you. You swore you'd destroy me. And I nearly succeeded. White Ridge was my masterpiece. Watching you break, watching the great shade crumble under the weight of dead children. That was satisfaction worth waiting decades for." Marcus Stone looked between them, beginning to understand. "You knew each other. You did this deliberately." "I've orchestrated land acquisitions across 5 territories, Mr. Stone. You were simply the latest tool in a very successful operation. Nothing personal, just business." "Children died at White Ridge," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to something cold and lethal. "You murdered them to hurt me, to break me. That's not business. That's evil." Drake shrugged. Semantics. The point is, you're too late. Colonel Foster is already en route with the forged documents that will give me legal claim to every lithium deposit in this valley. By tomorrow, I'll own it all, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Eleanor's smile was predatory. "I wouldn't be so sure. You made one mistake, Drake. You assumed I was still the broken woman who ran away from White Ridge. But I spent 5 years growing things, learning to build instead of destroy, and I realized something important." She moved forward, and Drake actually took a step back. "The woman you broke was just a weapon, but Eleanor Hayes is something more. She's a farmer, a protector, a teacher, and she will burn your empire to ash to save what she's grown here." Rebecca cut Tucker free while keeping her weapon trained on Drake. The sheriff stood slowly, rubbing circulation back into his wrists. "Eleanor Hayes," Tucker said, recognition dawning. "The Shade, Knox placed you here years ago. 5 years, and now the mission is complete. Drake's plans end tonight." Drake laughed. "You can't stop Foster. You can't prove anything. And even if you could, I have Senator Hawkins in my pocket. The federal government will protect me. Then I'll testify. And so will Marcus. And so will Rebecca. 3 credible witnesses. Your empire was built on secrecy, Drake. In the light, it crumbles." She was right, and they both knew it. Drake's hand moved toward his vest, and Eleanor's Remingtons tracked the motion. But it was Jack Garrett who fired his shot, taking the Derringer from Drake's grip before the man could bring it to bear. "No one threatens Shade," Jack said quietly. "She spared my life. I owe her." Drake sagged, the fight draining out of him as he realized the game was finally over. Eleanor zip-tied his wrists and turned to Marcus. "You've been played. Catherine Grant never poisoned your water. Drake did. He wanted you to kill each other so he could sweep in and claim the lithium under emergency territorial laws. Every move you've made for the last 2 years has been choreographed by him." Marcus's face went through a complex series of emotions as pieces clicked into place. All the convenient intelligence, all the perfectly timed provocations, all the moments when war had seemed inevitable. "My God," he whispered. "Catherine's husband. The mind collapse. That was Drake too. Richard Grant tried to warn you about Drake's operation. Drake had him killed and made it look like an accident, then spent 7 years making sure you and Catherine blamed each other instead of looking for the real killer." The rage that filled Marcus's face was terrible to see. He turned toward Drake, hand on his revolver. Eleanor stepped between them. "Not like this," she said firmly. "He faces justice, real justice. A trial, the truth exposed. His victims get to see him answer for everything. That's how we're different from him. We believe in something better than revenge." Marcus's hand slowly moved away from his weapon. He nodded once, accepting Eleanor's authority. Dawn was breaking over Ridge Valley as they assembled at the church. Catherine Grant, legs splinted, sitting beside Marcus Stone, the two former enemies regarding each other with new understanding. Sheriff Tucker nursing cracked ribs but alive. Dr. Miller exhausted but smiling. Jack Garrett, who had chosen the right side when it mattered. Rebecca Cole, her father's daughter, in every way that counted. And Eleanor Hayes standing at the center of it all, no longer hiding behind a farmer's humble disguise. "This valley stands at a crossroads," she said. "You can continue the way you were going, tearing each other apart while vultures like Drake profit from your blood. Or you can choose something different, something better." "What are you proposing?" Catherine asked. Eleanor produced Governor Knox's letter. "A cooperative. 40% of lithium profits go to the local community for schools, hospitals, infrastructure. 30% to Stone Enterprises. 30% to Grant Trading Company. I keep my plateau and charge fair transit fees. No one gets rich, no one gets robbed. Everyone gets a future." Marcus and Catherine looked at each other. 7 years of hatred. 7 years of war. And underneath it all, two people who had both been victims of the same predator. Catherine extended her hand. Marcus, after a long moment, took it. The handshake that saved Ridge Valley. Finn Baker returned with an Owen Stone and 20 ranchers just as the deal was finalized. The boy looked at Eleanor with new eyes, seeing past the farmer to the legend beneath. "What happens now?" Finn asked. "Now we stop Colonel Foster from delivering Drake's forged documents. Now we expose the entire conspiracy. Now we make sure Ridge Valley's future belongs to Ridge Valley's people." Eleanor rested her hand on Finn's shoulder. "And then if you still want it, I teach you everything your father would have taught you, starting with the most important lesson he ever taught me." "What's that?" "That the hardest battles are not fought with guns. They're fought with principles, with courage, with the willingness to stand up and say enough when the world wants you to stay silent. Your father never stayed silent, and neither will we." As the sun rose fully over Iron Ridge Mountains, Eleanor Hayes stood on the church steps and looked out over the town she had spent 5 years protecting from the shadows. The valley stretched before her, beautiful and brutal and worth every sacrifice. Shade had returned, not as the broken weapon Harrison Drake had tried to destroy, but as something stronger, something that could both fight and heal, both protect and nurture. The ghosts of 27 dead men would always follow her. But maybe now they would be joined by the faces of those she had saved. A different kind of haunting. A better kind. The war for Ridge Valley was not over. Colonel Foster still approached with his forged documents. Drake's network still stretched across 5 territories. Senator Hawkins still sat in Washington, corrupt and protected. But for the first time in 7 years, Eleanor Hayes felt something she had thought lost forever. Hope. And hope, she had learned, was the most dangerous weapon of all. The sun had barely climbed above the Iron Ridge peaks when Eleanor Hayes, Rebecca Cole, and a contingent of armed men from both Marcus Stone and Catherine Grant's factions began their march toward the northern pass. The alliance forged in the church's dim sanctuary less than 6 hours ago remained fragile, held together by shared purpose and the steely presence of a woman who had spent 5 years hiding what she truly was. Sheriff Tucker limped beside Eleanor, his ribs wrapped tight beneath his shirt, every breath a reminder of Marcus Stone's interrogation. But his eyes were clear, his jaw set with the determination of a man who had watched his town nearly tear itself apart and would die before letting it happen again. "Colonel Daniel Foster will reach Iron Ridge Pass by 1100 hours, Tucker said, consulting the intelligence Rebecca had gathered. 5 men total, all former military, all loyal to Drake's money. They're carrying a leather portfolio containing the forged mining deeds, pre-signed judicial clearances, and enough fake documentation to legally strip this valley of everything it owns." Eleanor checked the Winchester slung across her back, then adjusted the twin Remingtons riding in worn holsters beneath her coat. The morning air carried the smell of last night's fire smoke still rising from the trading company's ruins. Ashford had survived the night, but barely. 12 wounded. No deaths by some miracle. Eleanor attributed more to luck than planning. She would not rely on luck today. "How many men can we position without tipping our hand?" she asked Marcus, who rode slightly ahead on his black stallion, his usual swagger replaced by something harder and more focused. 20 from Owen's ranchers, Marcus replied, his voice carrying none of yesterday's arrogance. Humiliation had a way of burning away false pride, leaving only the useful parts. 15 of my people who aren't nursing bullet wounds. And Catherine's people, 12, Catherine called from the wagon where she rode her broken leg splinted and elevated. Briggs Cole, her operations chief, handled the reins with military precision. All good shots, all tired of Drake's manipulation. 47 armed men and women converging on a mountain pass to intercept a 5-man convoy. The numbers should have made Eleanor feel confident. Instead, they made her nervous. Too many guns meant too many chances for things to spiral out of control. Connor Walsh and his wolves had been professionals, but they were predictable. Foster was different. Foster was a soldier who had spent the last 10 years as a mercenary, which meant he had learned to survive by reading situations and adapting fast. If Foster decided to fight rather than surrender, the pass would become a slaughterhouse. Rebecca rode close, her gray mare matching pace with Eleanor's roan. You know Foster personally, Boimler. Eleanor nodded, memory pulling her back 10 years to a burning farmhouse and a choice that had defined who she was. Henderson County War, 2009. Foster was a major then, working as a military contractor for a mining consortium. They wanted a family of homesteaders gone. Foster decided the fastest way was to burn them out. I arrived as he was setting the fire with the family still inside. What happened? I stopped him, got the family out. 7 people, including a 15-year-old girl with red hair who reminded me of someone I couldn't save in Vietnam. Eleanor glanced at Rebecca. Your father was with me that day. Tom Cole kicked down the door while I laid down covering fire. Foster and his men scattered when they realized they were facing federal marshals, not local law. Rebecca's eyes widened. That girl, the one you saved, that was me. The world seemed to tilt slightly. Eleanor stared at the younger woman, seeing her now in the firelight of memory, the terrified teenager dragging her younger siblings from a burning building. The girl who had thanked Eleanor with tears streaming down soot-stained cheeks, the last surviving child of Thomas Cole. You were there, Eleanor said softly. I didn't recognize you. You've grown. Dad never talked about that day much, but I remember your voice, calm, steady, telling me everything would be okay. Rebecca's hand moved to rest on the revolver at her hip. Foster tried to kill my entire family. He would have succeeded if not for you. Eleanor felt the weight of that connection settle between them. The past was not just history. It was a living thing, tendrils reaching forward to shape the present in ways neither of them had anticipated. Foster had tried to murder Rebecca Cole's family. Now Rebecca rode beside Eleanor to stop Foster from destroying an entire valley. The symmetry was almost poetic. When we face him today, Eleanor said carefully, remember that Foster is not just a mercenary, he's a father. Drake has his family, wife and 2 daughters in Denver. Drake threatened them to ensure Foster's cooperation. Rebecca's expression hardened. So we're supposed to feel sorry for him. No, we're supposed to understand him. Understanding your enemy is how you beat them without becoming them. Eleanor met Rebecca's gaze directly. Your father taught me that. Every person, no matter how far they've fallen, has something they love, something they have to protect. Foster loves his family. That's our leverage. The column reached Iron Ridge Pass just before 9 in the morning. The pass was a natural bottleneck where the mountain trail narrowed to barely 20 feet across towering rock walls rising on both sides. It was perfect ambush terrain, which was exactly why Eleanor had chosen it. Foster would have to come through here. There was no other route from Kingston to Ashford that wagons could traverse. Eleanor deployed the forces with careful precision. Owen Stone's ranchers took the southern exit, blocking retreat. Marcus's gunmen spread along the western ridge, positioned behind boulders and scraggly pines. Catherine's guards claimed the eastern ridge, creating a crossfire that would make resistance suicidal. Eleanor and Rebecca remained at the pass's northern entrance, visible and apparently alone. The bait in a trap that would only work if Foster believed he could negotiate his way out. Sheriff Tucker and Finn Baker took position at the command post 300 yards back, equipped with a radio transmitter that would let them coordinate the various factions. Finn had insisted on coming despite Eleanor's protests, and she had finally relented when the boy pointed out that his father would have done the same at his age. The kid had Tom Cole's stubborn courage. That was both encouraging and terrifying. Remember, Eleanor said into her radio broadcasting to all positions, "We want Foster alive. We need his testimony against Drake. Do not fire unless I give the explicit order. If shooting starts, aim to disable, not kill. These are soldiers, not monsters. They're just following orders." "Even evil orders?" Marcus asked over the channel. "Especially evil orders. That's when mercy matters most." They settled in to wait. Tension hung over the pass like humidity before a thunderstorm, thick enough to taste. Men checked their weapons repeatedly, nervous energy needing outlet. Eleanor remained still, conserving energy the way she had learned in Vietnam, when conserving energy meant the difference between alertness and deadly distraction. At 10:30, the sound of hoofbeats echoed through the pass. Eleanor stood alone in the center of the trail as 5 riders emerged from the northern approach. Colonel Daniel Foster led them, sitting his saddle with military bearing, despite the decades since he had worn a uniform officially. He was 48 now, his hair gray-streaked at the temples, a prominent scar crossing his left cheek where a cavalry saber had kissed him during some forgotten skirmish. His eyes were the color of winter clouds, hard and assessing. Those eyes widened slightly when they recognized Eleanor. "Marshal Hayes," Foster said, his voice carrying educated smoothness that did not quite hide the Texas drawl beneath. "Or is it Gray? I heard conflicting reports about whether you were dead." "Reports of my death were exaggerated." Eleanor kept her hands visible and empty, the Remingtons holstered but accessible. "Stand down, Colonel. You're surrounded." Foster scanned the ridges with professional efficiency, spotting the rifle barrels that had not been concealed quite perfectly enough. 47 guns aimed at 5 men. The mathematics were unambiguous. "Impressive deployment," Foster acknowledged, "but I'm carrying legal documents signed by federal judges. You have no authority to detain me." "Those documents were forged by Harrison Drake. I have the real Judge Henry Quaid on my side. Your papers are worthless." Foster's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his face before he locked it down. "Drake said you were dead." "Drake says a lot of things. Most of them are lies designed to get people like you killed while he profits safely from a distance." Eleanor took a step forward. "You're being played, Colonel. Drake is in custody facing 37 federal charges. Senator Hawkins, his political protection, is being arrested as we speak. You deliver those papers, you become an accomplice to fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit murder. Is Drake's money worth 20 years in federal prison?" The 4 soldiers with Foster exchanged glances. They were not invested in this the way Foster was. They were hired guns doing a job. The prospect of federal charges was making them reconsider their employment choices. Foster dismounted slowly, hands carefully away from his weapons. He walked forward until he stood 10 feet from Eleanor, studying her face with the intensity of someone trying to read a coded message. "Henderson County," he said finally. "The farmhouse, you remember." "I remember. You tried to kill civilians. I stopped you." "I was following Drake's orders." The admission came out quietly, almost too soft to hear. "He said if I didn't comply, he would kill my wife and daughters. Anna, Lily, Emma. He had men watching them. He showed me photographs of them at school, at the grocery store, getting their hair cut. He made it very clear what would happen if I refused." Eleanor felt something crack in her chest. She had been prepared for defiance, for violence, for the righteous fury of a cornered animal. She had not been prepared for this, a broken man confessing that he had become a monster because monsters held his family hostage. "You had no choice," she said, and meant it. "No, but that doesn't make what I did right. I've regretted Henderson County every day since. When you stopped me, part of me was relieved. You saved me from becoming something I couldn't live with." Foster's voice cracked. "But Drake found me again 2 years ago. Same threats, same photographs, different family, older kids, but the terror was exactly the same. You have a chance to choose differently now." Eleanor moved closer, lowering her voice so only Foster could hear. "Give me the portfolio. Testify against Drake. I will personally guarantee the safety of your wife and daughters. Federal protective custody. New identities. A chance to disappear and start over without Drake's shadow following you. You'd do that." Foster searched her face for deception and found none. "After what I did, after I tried to murder that family, your partner's family. Everyone deserves a second chance, Colonel. Even you. Especially you. Because the man who feels genuine remorse, who understands the weight of his crimes, that's the man who can be redeemed. I've killed 27 people, every one of them legal, every one justified. But I still see their faces every night. I still hear their last words. The only way I survive it is by believing that people can change, can choose to be better tomorrow than they were yesterday. Foster's eyes glistened. For a long moment, he stood frozen, the weight of a decade's worth of terrible choices pressing down on him. Then slowly he reached for the saddlebag on his horse. The 47 rifles on the ridges tracked the movement, ready to fire if this was a trick. It was not a trick. Foster removed the leather portfolio and handed it to Eleanor with both hands, like a penitent offering a confession to a priest. "Thank you, Marshal." The 47 rifles lowered. No shots fired. No blood spilled. Victory through mercy instead of violence. Eleanor radioed to Finn. "Mission accomplished. Foster has surrendered. No casualties." Over the radio, she heard the boy's voice crack with relief and joy. "Copy that, Miss Hayes. Marcus and Catherine want to know what happens now." Now we open this portfolio and see exactly what Drake was planning to steal. They gathered at the command post, the various factions mixing uneasily, but without open hostility. Eleanor opened the portfolio on a flat boulder, Rebecca and Sheriff Tucker flanking her, while Foster explained each document. 15 pages of forged mining deeds, each one claiming ownership of lithium deposits across Ridge Valley. The signatures were expertly counterfeited. Governor Knox, Judge Roy Blaine, various federal officials. Backdated to 2020, giving the impression that Drake had legally purchased these rights years ago. 8 pages of pre-sign and judicial clearances authorizing emergency seizure of disputed properties. These were particularly insidious, designed to be activated the moment Marcus and Catherine's conflict escalated to declared war. Automatic transfers of ownership from the combatants to a neutral third party, namely Harrison Drake's Shell Corporation. But it was the final 9 pages that made Eleanor's hands shake with fury. A complete ledger of bribes. 47 names. 47 officials across 5 states. Judges, sheriffs, mayors, territorial land agents. Each one listed with dates, amounts paid, services rendered. The total reached $2.3 million, an empire of corruption laid out in meticulous detail. And at the top of the list, Senator Gerald Hawkins, $500,000, with a notation that read, "Federal investigation suppression, Cameron County, through Ridge Valley operations." "This is enough to bring down his entire network," Rebecca breathed. "Not just Ridge Valley, all 5 territories he's corrupted." Tucker leaned over the ledger, his finger tracing names he recognized. "Half the law enforcement in Montana is on this list. Judge Blaine, Sheriff Morrison, Mayor Hendricks. They've all been on Drake's payroll for years." Marcus Stone's face had gone pale. Cameron County, Blue River, Hatchfield, Sterling Hills. All the places where land wars erupted and Drake's company swooped in afterward to buy property at disaster prices. He orchestrated all of them. Hundreds of people died in those wars, and he profited from every corpse. 57 years, Eleanor said quietly. "He's been doing this for 57 years since Vietnam, profiting from case, creating wars, and harvesting the aftermath." Foster spoke up from where he sat with his hands zip-tied, not a prisoner so much as a protected witness. "There's one more thing you need to know. Drake has a fail-safe, Protocol Omega. If his operation is compromised, if the portfolio is seized, he has men positioned to destroy all physical evidence and evacuate him to the Cayman Islands. We have maybe 12 hours before he activates it." Eleanor checked her watch. 7 hours had passed since they arrested Drake at the Iron Horse. That left 5 hours to get back to Ashford, secure the evidence, and ensure Drake could not destroy what would convict him. "Mount up," she ordered. "Everyone, we ride hard for town." The column moved at near gallop speed, pushing horses to their limits, rotating mounts, when the animals showed signs of exhaustion. They covered the 10 miles back to Ashford in just under 2 hours, arriving to find the town in chaos. Drake had escaped. Sheriff Tucker's deputy, a young man named Morrison who had seemed trustworthy and competent, lay unconscious in the jail cell that should have held Drake. The cell door stood open. Drake's expensive suit jacket remained, but the man himself had vanished. Tucker knelt beside his deputy, checking for pulse and finding it steady. Drug not dead, Morrison's son has medical bills. Drake must have paid him off. Where would Drake run? Eleanor demanded. Private airstrip 10 miles north, Marcus said immediately. I used it for smuggling before I went legitimate. Takes 20 minutes by car, 15 by horse if you know the mountain trails. Eleanor was already moving toward the horses. Rebecca Finn, stay here and secure the town. Tucker, get Morrison to Doc Miller. Marcus Jack Owen, you're with me. 6 riders thundered out of Ashford as the sun reached its zenith, following trails that cut through dense pine forest and across rocky slopes where one misstep would send horse and rider tumbling to their deaths. Marcus led them with the confidence of someone who had traveled these paths in darkness while transporting illegal cargo, never questioning how he knew every twist and turn. Redemption was teaching him humility. Eleanor could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way he waited for her orders instead of assuming command. Power had made Marcus arrogant. Discovering he had been manipulated like a puppet made him wise. The first obstacle hit at mile 3, a narrow bridge spanning a deep ravine, old timber that groaned under the weight of the first horse. Eleanor crossed carefully, feeling the boards flex and crack beneath her. Marcus, heavier and on a larger mount, made it halfway across before the bridge began to collapse. Boss, go! Jack shouted. Marcus spurred his stallion into a desperate sprint. The bridge disintegrated behind him, boards plummeting into the ravine with sounds like rifle shots. He reached solid ground with his horse's rear hooves scrabbling for purchase momentum and terror carrying them to safety by inches. Everyone across, Eleanor ordered. Single file. Move fast, but don't panic the horses. They made it, barely leaving the ruined bridge behind them. The second obstacle came at mile 8. A rock slide, fresh dirt still sliding, boulders the size of wagons blocking the trail. The slide had been triggered deliberately. Eleanor spotted the rope mechanism tied to a tree, a trap set by Drake's rear guard. Ambush, she said, just as 3 men opened fire from the tree line. The world exploded into chaos. Jack Garrett and Owen Stone's ranchers returned fire their shots, forcing the ambushers to keep their heads down. Eleanor dismounted and flanked left through the forest, moving with the practiced silence of someone who had hunted and been hunted through jungles far deadlier than Montana pine woods. She came up behind the first ambusher, a young man no older than 25, who was focused entirely on the riders pinned on the trail. Eleanor's hand closed on his rifle barrel, yanking the weapon away and delivering an elbow strike that dropped him unconscious without permanent injury. The second ambusher spun toward her, finger tightening on his trigger. Eleanor moved inside his guard, too close for the rifle to be effective, and delivered a palm strike to his solar plexus that folded him over, gasping. A knee to the temple finished the job. The third ambusher saw his companions fall and made a choice. He dropped his rifle and raised his hands. Smart, Eleanor said. She zip-tied all 3 and left them for Owen's men to collect. The column continued, having lost precious minutes, but no lives. At mile 15, the private airstrip came into view. A single Cessna sat on the packed dirt runway, engines already warming up. Through binoculars, Eleanor could see Drake in the cockpit frantically checking instruments, while a pilot beside him worked the controls. 200 yards. An impossible shot on horseback. An improbable shot standing still. Marcus Stone pulled his Winchester from its saddle scabbard, dismounted, and dropped to one knee. He breathed out slowly, finger resting gently on the trigger, and fired. The Cessna's front tire exploded. The aircraft veered sharply, engine screaming as the pilot tried to compensate. The Cessna careened off the runway, struck a fence post, and ground to a halt in a shower of dust and torn metal. Not a fatal crash, just destructive enough to ensure it would never fly again. Eleanor stared at Marcus with new respect. That was a hell of a shot. I was a sniper in Korea, Marcus said simply, before I became a criminal. Some skills you never lose. They reached the crashed Cessna to find Drake crawling from the wreckage, his expensive suit torn and dirty blood trickling from a broken nose. The man who had orchestrated 5 land wars and murdered countless people in pursuit of profit now looked like nothing more than a frightened old man confronted by consequences he had spent a lifetime avoiding. Eleanor pulled out her badge and held it where Drake could see the tarnished metal gleaming in the afternoon sun. Harrison Drake, you are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, murder, for hire, bribery of federal officials, and war crimes committed in Vietnam in 1968. You have the right to remain silent. Drake laughed, a broken sound edged with hysteria. War crimes, that was 57 years ago. Statute of limitations, Marshal. You can't touch me for that. War crimes have no statute of limitations. And I have testimony from 12 surviving villagers you tried to kill at my lie. They've been waiting 57 years for justice. Today they get it. The laugh died. Drake sagged against the ruined aircraft, the weight of 6 decades of evil finally catching up with him. Why did you hunt me for so long? Why couldn't you just let me disappear after Vietnam? Eleanor knelt so they were eye to eye. Because you were the only person who ever stood up to me in Vietnam. Everyone else was corrupt, taking bribes, looking the other way. But you reported me. You ruined my career. I wanted you to feel the same pain. So you orchestrated White Ridge. You murdered children. You destroyed my life. Just to hurt me. Yes. No shame, no remorse, just cold admission of monstrous calculation. Eleanor stood and hauled Drake to his feet with more force than strictly necessary. Then you're not just a criminal. You're a monster. And monsters belong in cages where they can't hurt anyone else. They bound Drake's hands and began the journey back to Ashford. The sun had begun its descent toward the western peaks, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber. Beautiful and brutal, in equal measure, this land that had been fought over and bled for and nearly destroyed by one man's 57-year grudge. Rebecca's voice crackled over the radio as they approached town. Eleanor Judge Margaret Chen has arrived from Helena, Federal District Court. She's setting up a preliminary hearing for tomorrow morning. You need to prepare your testimony. Eleanor acknowledged and rode into Ashford as the sun touched the horizon. The town looked different now. The barricades had been dismantled. Armed men from opposing factions worked side by side to repair damage from last night's violence. Children played in streets that 12 hours ago had been kill zones. This was what she had spent 5 years protecting. Not the land, not the lithium, the people, the possibility of something better than endless cycles of violence and revenge. At the church, she found Catherine and Marcus already deep in conversation, their earlier alliance solidifying into something that looked almost like friendship. Owen Stone sat with Sheriff Tucker, both men reviewing lists of officials who would need to be replaced once Drake's corruption network was exposed. Finn Baker helped Doc Miller organize medical supplies, while Rebecca coordinated with Judge Chen's staff to arrange secure facilities for the hearing. Eleanor stood on the church steps and watched her valley prepare for the future. Tomorrow would bring trials and testimony just as slow and imperfect, but real. The lithium would be developed cooperatively, profits shared fairly, the valley's future belonging to the valley's people rather than distant corporations. But first they needed to survive the night. Drake's Protocol Omega remained active. Somewhere men loyal to him waited for the signal to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses. Foster's testimony had made it clear Drake never left loose ends. If he could not escape, he would burn everything to ensure no one else profited from his failures. Eleanor gathered the core group in the church's basement: Rebecca, Marcus, Catherine, Jack Garrett, Owen Stone, Sheriff Tucker, and Finn. Doc Miller stood guard outside his old service revolver, cleaned and loaded for the first time in years. Drake's men will come tonight, Eleanor said without preamble. Foster estimates between 10 and 15 operatives, all professionals. They'll target 3 locations: this church, where we're holding Drake, the courthouse, where Judge Chen is staying, and my plateau, where the original evidence is stored in my cabin. We can't defend 3 locations with our numbers, Marcus objected. We've got maybe 30 people who aren't wounded or exhausted. Then we don't defend 3 locations. We consolidate. Move Drake to the courthouse. Move Judge Chen's staff here. And we evacuate my cabin entirely, bring everything essential to the bank vault. That puts everyone in 2 locations instead of 3, Rebecca said, seeing Eleanor's logic. Easier to defend, harder to divide our forces. Exactly. Jack, you and Owen take 15 people to the courthouse. Fortify it. Marcus, you and Catherine handle the church with another 15. I'll be moving between both with Rebecca and Finn, ready to reinforce whoever needs it. The deployments were made. The town transformed into a fortress as darkness fell. Eleanor moved through the preparations with methodical efficiency, checking fields of fire, ensuring ammunition stockpiles were positioned properly, making certain everyone understood the rules of engagement. No shots fired until the enemy revealed themselves. Protect the civilians sheltering in basements. Disable, don't kill whenever possible. The same rules that had guided her for 30 years as a marshal. The rules that separated lawmen from murderers. Midnight came and went. 1 in the morning. 2. Tension stretched nerves to breaking points. Men jumped at shadows. Someone fired at a cat, wasting ammunition and embarrassing themselves. Eleanor used the moment to reinforce her earlier orders. 3:15 in the morning, the attack began. 10 men dressed in black tactical gear hit the courthouse in a coordinated assault. Flashbangs shattered windows. Smoke grenades created chaos. But Jack Garrett had learned from his mistakes at Eleanor's plateau. His people were positioned inside, away from windows, wearing cloth over their mouths against the smoke. When Drake's men breached the front entrance, they walked into a crossfire that dropped 5 of them in the first exchange. The remaining 5 retreated, dragging their wounded with professional discipline that spoke to extensive training. At the church, the attack was subtler. 3 men tried to infiltrate through the basement windows, while 2 more created a distraction at the front entrance. But Marcus Stone, who had spent years as a criminal before his redemption, knew every trick in the book. His people had rigged the basement windows with tripwires connected to bells. The moment the infiltrators triggered the alarms, Marcus's people lit oil lamps that illuminated the basement in harsh light. The 3 men found themselves exposed, surrounded, and completely outmaneuvered. They surrendered without firing a shot. Eleanor and Rebecca reached the courthouse just as Jack's people were zip-tying the captured operatives. 8 prisoners total, not one of them killed. All of them now potential witnesses against Drake's network. "Where's the other 7? Eleanor demanded of the nearest prisoner. Foster said 15 men. We've only accounted for 8. The prisoner, a hard-faced man in his 40s with military tattoos, spat blood and refused to answer. Eleanor knelt beside him, her voice dropping to something cold enough to freeze water. "I spent 12 years as a federal marshal hunting men worse than you. I've interrogated terrorist cartel enforcers and serial killers. You're going to tell me where your friends went, or I'm going to make sure you face the maximum sentence for every charge we can invent. That's 20 years minimum, more likely 40. You'll die in prison, never seeing your family again." The man's resolve cracked. "The plateau. They went to burn your cabin. Drake said the original evidence is there, the documents that prove his involvement in Cameron County. They have orders to destroy it all and anyone guarding it." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. Her cabin, the oak chest containing her past, the newspaper clippings, the old Marshal Service reports, everything that could prove Drake's 57-year reign of terror. She was already running for the horses before Rebecca caught up. "I'm coming with you." "Rebecca, no, this is personal. I won't risk you. My father taught me that the most important fights are the ones we choose to stand for when we could walk away. Your cabin, your past, that's not just evidence. That's who you are. I'm not letting you face this alone." Eleanor had no time to argue. They rode hard for the plateau, pushing the horses beyond safe limits, the darkness making every root and rock a potential disaster. The mountain trail that had taken 2 hours to descend earlier now felt endless, each minute another moment for Drake's men to reach her cabin and destroy everything inside. They were still a mile away when Eleanor smelled smoke. The cabin was burning when they crested the ridge, flames devouring the structure she had spent 5 years making into a home. 7 men stood around the fire, 2 of them pouring accelerant to feed the blaze, while the others maintained a perimeter watch. Eleanor and Rebecca dismounted and approached on foot, using the darkness and the crackling flames as cover. Eleanor counted targets, calculated angles, assessed the tactical situation with the cold precision that had made her legendary. 7 targets, 2 rifles visible, probably more concealed. Professional positioning. These were not the amateurs who had attacked the church and courthouse. These were Drake's best people, his final insurance policy. Rebecca tapped Eleanor's shoulder and pointed. One of the men was dragging the oak chest from the cabin, its wood scorched but intact. They were going to burn it next. Burn Eleanor's past. Burn the evidence of her 27 kills, her service record, everything that proved who she had been. Eleanor was moving before conscious thought caught up. She came out of the darkness like her namesake, both Remingtons drawn, and fired twice. The man holding the chest took hits to both shoulders and dropped screaming. The chest hit the ground hard enough to crack, but did not break open. "Federal Marshal," Eleanor's voice cut through the night, "You're under arrest. Drop your weapons." The response was immediate gunfire from three directions. Eleanor and Rebecca dove for cover behind a water trough, bullets chewing wood and splashing water across them. This was not like Connor Walsh's crew professionals, but ultimately criminals. This was combat against trained operators who knew how to work together. "Rebecca, when I move, you cover the left flank. I'm going right." "That's suicide. There's too many of them." "Then I'll die doing what I've always done, protecting what matters." Eleanor ran, not away from the gunfire, but into it. The move was so unexpected, so contrary to every tactical principle, that it froze the shooters for half a second. Half a second was all she needed. Her Remington spoke in rapid succession, dropping two men with shots to their legs. She rolled behind a tree as return fire shredded bark where she had been standing. Rebecca was firing from the trough, her shots forcing the left flank to keep their heads down. Eleanor used the distraction to flank right, coming up behind a third shooter who never heard her approach until her boot connected with his kidney. He went down hard. Four left. "Stand down," Eleanor shouted. "Drake is in custody. You're fighting for a man who can't pay you, can't protect you, can't do anything but drag you down with him. Surrender now and I'll testify on your behalf. Keep fighting and you face the full weight of federal law." A long moment of silence. Then one by one weapons hit the ground. The remaining four operatives raised their hands. They were mercenaries, not martyrs. Without Drake's money motivating them, they had no reason to die for a lost cause. Eleanor zip-tied them while Rebecca called for backup. Only then did she allow herself to look at her cabin. The structure was a total loss, walls collapsed into burning rubble. But the oak chest remained intact. She dragged it away from the flames and opened it with shaking hands. Everything was there. The Remington revolvers she had just used in combat, the Winchester, the badge, the newspaper clippings, smoke-stained but readable, the Marshal Service reports documenting her 27 kills, the photographs of her standing beside Governor Knox and other marshals she had worked with over the years. Her past, burned and battered but not destroyed. She sat in the dirt beside the chest and allowed herself one moment of weakness. Tears tracked through the soot on her face, grief for the home she had built, and loss mixing with relief that the evidence remained. Rebecca sat beside her in silence, offering presence without words, understanding that sometimes the most valuable support was simply being there. "I'm sorry about your home," Rebecca finally said. "Home isn't a building. It's people, responsibilities, the things we choose to protect." Eleanor closed the chest and stood her moment of weakness over. "Come on, we have a trial to prepare for." They rode back down the mountain as dawn broke over Ridge Valley, carrying the chest between them, the evidence of 57 years of crime and corruption, ready to finally see the light of a courtroom. Judge Margaret Chen convened the preliminary hearing at 9 in the morning in Ashford's courthouse, a building that had survived last night's attack with only minor damage. The courtroom was packed with townspeople, all of them wanting to see the man who had nearly destroyed their home face justice. Eleanor took the witness stand wearing the same clothes she had worn all night, soot-stained and smelling of smoke and gunpowder. Judge Chen, a stern woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair and no tolerance for nonsense, swore her in. "Please state your name and occupation for the record." "Eleanor Hayes, also known as Augustus Gray, badge number 247, United States Marshal Service, currently on special assignment as a territorial investigator for Governor Edgar Knox." "Marshal Hayes, please describe your relationship to the defendant, Harrison Drake." Eleanor took a breath and began at the beginning. Vietnam, 1968. The massacre Drake had ordered. Her report that ended his CIA career. His vow of revenge. Then forward to Cameron County, where she had been investigating Drake's land acquisition schemes just before the White Ridge courthouse attack. The Dawson brothers did not act alone. They were hired by Drake to create chaos, to kill me, and to destroy my reputation. The civilian casualties, including 3 children, were not accidents. They were deliberate. Drake wanted me to break, wanted me to quit, and it worked. She detailed the 5 land wars Drake had orchestrated: Cameron County, Blue River, Hatchfield, Sterling Hills, and finally Ridge Valley. Each one following the same pattern: manipulate local factions into conflict, wait for casualties to mount, then use emergency territorial laws to seize land at depression prices. How many people died in these conflicts? Judge Chen asked. Across all 5 territories, the death toll is approximately 370 people. Men, women, children, all of them killed in wars that Drake manufactured for profit. The courtroom erupted. Judge Chen banged her gavel until order was restored. Eleanor continued presenting the bribery ledger, explaining each name, each payment, each corrupted official who had enabled Drake's empire. When she finished, the judge called Colonel Daniel Foster to the stand. Foster testified about his own coercion, Drake's threats against his family, and the operation to deliver forged documents that would have given Drake legal claim to $50 billion in lithium deposits. He provided dates, locations, and details that corroborated everything Eleanor had said. "And you're willing to testify against Drake in federal court?" Judge Chen asked. "Yes, Your Honor. I've spent 10 years running from my mistakes. It's time to face them." The final witness was Marcus Stone. Marcus detailed Drake's manipulation, the false intelligence that had turned him against Catherine Grant, the escalating tensions that Drake had stoked like a fire meant to consume them all. "I'm not innocent," Marcus said clearly. "I've broken laws. I've hurt people. I deserve to answer for that. But Drake made me worse than I already was. He turned my business rivalry with Catherine into a blood feud that nearly destroyed this valley. And he profited from every ounce of suffering he caused." Judge Chen reviewed the evidence for 2 hours, reading through documents, consulting legal precedents, and finally delivering her preliminary ruling. "Harrison Drake, I am ordering you held without bail pending federal trial in Helena on charges of racketeering, conspiracy, fraud, murder, for hire, bribery of federal officials, and war crimes. Your assets are frozen. Your operations are under federal investigation. And as of this moment, you are no longer protected by any political connections you may have believed would save you." "Senator Hawkins," Drake began. "Senator Hawkins was arrested this morning in Washington. He will face his own trial for accepting bribes and obstruction of justice." Judge Chen closed her folder with finality. "This court is adjourned." Federal marshals led Drake away in chains. The man who had spent 57 years profiting from violence and suffering finally faced consequences he could not buy or manipulate his way out of. As he passed Eleanor, he tried one last time to wound her with words. "You haven't won. My lawyers will tie this up in appeals for years. I'll be dead before I serve a day." Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. "Maybe, but everyone will know what you did. Every victim across 5 territories will know justice was attempted, and that's more than you gave any of them." Drake had no answer to that. In the days following the hearing, Ridge Valley began to heal. Catherine Grant and Marcus Stone formally announced the creation of the Ridge Valley Mining Cooperative with profit sharing exactly as Eleanor had proposed. 40% to the community, 30% each to Stone Enterprises and Grant Trading Company. The first action of the cooperative was to fund rebuilding for everyone who had lost homes or businesses in the violence. The second was to establish a scholarship program for children who had lost parents, ensuring the next generation would have opportunities their parents had been denied. Sheriff Tucker formally deputized Eleanor, making her position official. Finn Baker began training as her assistant, learning the skills his father would have taught him. Rebecca Cole offered a position as Pinkerton's Western Regional Director, declined in favor of staying in Ridge Valley as Catherine Grant's security chief and Eleanor's partner when marshal work required 2 guns instead of 1. Dr. Miller, who had saved Eleanor's life 57 years ago in Vietnam, now saved it again in a different way. He convinced the town council to deed Eleanor 20 acres of plateau land to replace what had burned and organized a barn raising that saw 200 people from across the valley come together to build her a new cabin in a single day. On the day the cabin was finished, Eleanor stood on the new porch and looked out over Ridge Valley. The view was the same as from her old home, but everything else had changed. She was no longer hiding, no longer pretending to be someone she was not. The shade had returned but transformed. Still capable of violence when necessary, but choosing to build and protect rather than simply hunt and kill. Marcus approached as sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and red. "There's something you need to know," he said quietly, "about your old cabin, the one that burned. When my people were cleaning up the site, they found this." He handed her a small wooden box, charred but intact. Inside was a collection of letters yellowed with age addressed to Gus in handwriting. Eleanor recognized immediately. Thomas Cole, Tom, Her partner for 6 years, Rebecca's father, the man who had died taking a bullet meant for someone else. Eleanor opened the first letter with shaking hands. Dear Gus, I know you don't like it when I get sentimental, but I wanted you to know that working with you has been the greatest honor of my career. You are the bravest person I've ever met, and someday the world will recognize what I already know, that you're not just a good marshal, but a good human being. If anything happens to me, look after Rebecca. She'll need someone to teach her what being strong really means. Your friend, always Tom. The letter was dated 3 days before his death. Eleanor read through all 17 letters, each one a testament to a friendship she had thought lost to time and grief. Tom had known he might die, had prepared for it, and had trusted Eleanor to look after the daughter he would leave behind. She looked at Marcus. How did these survive the fire? They were in a metal tin buried under the floorboards. The firefighters found them when they were making sure there were no hot spots that could reignite. Marcus paused. He believed in you, even when you didn't believe in yourself. Eleanor folded the letters carefully and placed them back in the box. Tell Rebecca to come see me tomorrow. There's something she needs to hear about her father. That night, as she lay in her new bed in her new cabin, Eleanor allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had finally earned the peace she had spent 5 years trying to find. The ghosts of 27 dead men would always follow her. But now they were joined by other spirits: Tom Cole, who had believed in her, Governor Knox, who had given her purpose, Dr. Miller, who had saved her body and her soul, and all the people of Ridge Valley who had chosen to trust a legend when legends had given them every reason to doubt. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: federal trials, testimony, the slow grinding machinery of justice working to dismantle Drake's empire piece by piece. But tonight Eleanor Hayes could rest knowing she had done what she set out to do. She had protected her home, she had saved her valley, and she had proven that even weapons could learn to be tools for building instead of destroying. The shade had returned, but she had returned as something more than just a ghost. She had returned as hope. The federal district courthouse in Helena, Montana stood like a monument to the idea that justice, however slow and imperfect, could still find its way through the darkness of human corruption. Eleanor Hayes stood on its marble steps 3 weeks after the preliminary hearing, watching the morning sun illuminate the carved words above the entrance, "Equal justice under law." She had never been naive enough to believe those words were always true, but she had spent her entire adult life trying to make them true. More often than not, Governor Edgar Knox arrived in a black sedan, his hair whiter than Eleanor remembered, but his eyes still sharp with the intelligence that had made him one of Montana's most effective governors. He climbed the steps slowly, age evident in his careful movements, and clasped Eleanor's hand with surprising strength. Augustus, Eleanor, I never quite know what to call you. Call me what you always have, friend. Knox smiled, the expression softening a face that had grown hard from decades of political combat. You did exactly what I hoped you would. Save the valley, expose Drake, and manage not to start a war in the process. Barely. There were moments when it could have gone very differently. But it didn't. That's what matters. Knox looked past her to where Rebecca Cole stood talking with Sheriff Tucker and Finn Baker. You've built something here. Not just a case against Drake, a community, people who trust each other again. Eleanor followed his gaze. Rebecca had become indispensable over the past 3 weeks, coordinating witnesses, organizing evidence, and somehow finding time to continue her security work for Catherine Grant. Finn had grown 2 inches, it seemed, his boyish features beginning to sharpen into the man he would become. Tucker walked with less pain. Now his ribs healed enough that he could move without wincing. They were her people, her responsibility. And if this trial went wrong, if Drake's lawyers found some technicality to exploit, all of them would remain in danger. Tell me honestly, Eleanor said quietly, what are our chances? Knox considered the question with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned not to make promises he couldn't keep. The evidence is overwhelming. The witnesses are credible. Judge Margaret Chen is fair but strict. Under normal circumstances, I'd say 90% certainty of conviction. And under these circumstances, Drake's lawyers are the best money can buy. They'll attack every witness, question every document, and try to make this about you instead of him. They'll paint you as a vigilante with a personal vendetta, someone who spent 5 years building a case based on grudges rather than facts. Knox met her eyes. They'll try to put you on trial instead of Drake. Eleanor had expected this. Good lawyers deflected attention from their clients by attacking the prosecutors. But knowing it was coming did not make it less dangerous. Let them try. I've got nothing to hide. The courtroom was packed when proceedings began at 9 sharp. Every seat filled with journalists, local residents who had traveled from Ridge Valley, and representatives from the other 4 territories Drake had victimized. The gallery hummed with anticipation, the kind of electric tension that preceded either justice or disaster. Harrison Drake sat at the defense table wearing an expensive hoodie that could not hide the fact that he was a 75-year-old man facing the possibility of dying in prison. His legal team, 4 attorneys from a prestigious New York firm, surrounded him like guards protecting valuable cargo. Judge Margaret Chen entered, her black robes crisp and her expression suggesting she would tolerate no nonsense from either side. The bailiff called the court to order, and the trial of Harrison Drake began. The prosecution, led by United States Attorney General Lisa Warren, opened with a statement that laid out Drake's 57-year criminal enterprise in stark detail. Vietnam War crimes, Cameron County land fraud, 4 more orchestrated conflicts culminating in the Ridge Valley operation, 370 deaths across 5 territories, $2.3 million in documented bribes, $50 billion in attempted theft. This is not a case about business decisions gone wrong, Warren told the jury, her voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. This is a case about a man who discovered that creating wars was profitable and spent 6 decades perfecting the art of making people kill each other so he could harvest the aftermath. Harrison Drake is not a businessman. He is a serial killer whose weapon of choice was manipulation rather than a gun. And today you will see the evidence that proves it. Drake's lead attorney, Thomas Blackwell, responded with the smooth confidence of someone who had spent 40 years defending the indefensible. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecution would have you believe that my client is some kind of criminal mastermind who orchestrated events across 5 states over 50 years. But the evidence you'll actually see tells a different story, a story of an aggressive marshal, Augustus Gray, who became obsessed with my client after a disagreement in Vietnam. A marshal who spent decades building a vendetta case, planting false evidence, and coercing witnesses to support an elaborate revenge fantasy. Blackwell pointed at Eleanor, sitting in the front row. Augustus Gray, who now calls herself Eleanor Hayes, killed 27 people as a marshal, 27. She claims every killing was justified, but how do we know she was investigated by the same agency that employed her? She was cleared by colleagues who benefited from keeping her reputation intact. And when her career finally fell apart at White Ridge, when her actions resulted in 7 civilian deaths, including 3 children, she vanished for 7 years. 7 years to plan this moment. 7 years to construct a false narrative. 7 years to ensure that the man who ended her career would pay for embarrassing her. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor felt every eye in the courtroom turned toward her. This was the defense strategy Knox had warned about. Put Eleanor on trial, make the case about her credibility rather than Drake's crimes. She met Blackwell's gaze without flinching and nodded slightly, acknowledging the attack. Blackwell seemed surprised by the lack of visible reaction. He had expected anger or defensiveness. Instead, Eleanor gave him nothing. The prosecution called witnesses in carefully structured order, building the case brick by brick. Colonel Daniel Foster testified first, describing his coercion by Drake, the threats against his family, and the forged documents he had been hired to deliver. Drake showed me photographs of my wife and daughters. Foster said, his voice steady despite the emotion beneath. Showed me surveillance footage of them at school, at the grocery store, at their piano lessons. He made it very clear what would happen if I refused to cooperate. So I cooperated. I delivered documents I knew were forged. I helped him steal from people who had done nothing wrong. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make amends for those choices. Blackwell's cross-examination was brutal. Colonel Foster, you claim Drake threatened your family. Do you have any evidence of these threats, any recordings, any photographs of the surveillance you described? Drake was careful. He never put anything in writing. How convenient. So we're simply supposed to take your word that a respected businessman threatened to murder your family unless you committed federal crimes on his behalf. Yes. And in exchange for this testimony, the government has offered you a reduced sentence and witness protection for your family, correct? Foster's jaw tightened. Yes. So you're facing 20 years in prison, and the only way to reduce that sentence is to tell the prosecution exactly what they want to hear. Is that fair to say? I'm telling the truth. Or you're telling a story that keeps you out of prison. We have no way to know which do we. The pattern repeated with each witness. The prosecution would present evidence. The defense would attack the witnesses' credibility, their motivations, their reliability. By the third day, Eleanor could see doubt beginning to creep into some jurors' faces. Blackwell was good, too good. On the fourth day, Eleanor took the stand. Lisa Warren walked her through her entire career, establishing her credentials, her service record, her 18 confirmed kills as a marshal, and the 9 additional deaths at White Ridge that had ended her career. Marshal Hayes, why did you retire after White Ridge? Eleanor had rehearsed this answer, but speaking it aloud still felt like tearing open an old wound. Because I failed. My job was to protect everyone in that courthouse. The Dawson brothers, the judge and jury, the civilians who came to observe justice being done. When the shooting started, I stopped the Dawsons, but 7 people died anyway. 3 of them children under the age of 12. I kept seeing their faces every night, kept hearing their mothers scream. I couldn't do the job anymore, so I quit. And you believe Drake orchestrated that attack? I know he did. I had been investigating his operations in Cameron County. I was close to exposing him. The Dawson brothers' attack was designed to do 2 things: kill me and destroy my credibility. It succeeded in the second, even though it failed in the first. Warren presented the documentary evidence, Drake's financial records, showing payments to associates of the Dawson brothers. Testimony from Connor Walsh, who had confirmed his cousins were hired. Communication logs showing Drake had contacted known criminals in the weeks before the attack. Then came Thomas Blackwell's turn. He approached the witness stand with the confidence of a predator who had spotted weakness. Marshall Hayes, or should I call you Augustus Gray? Which name do you prefer? Eleanor Hayes. That's who I've been for 7 years. But Augustus Gray is your legal name, the name on your birth certificate, the name you used throughout your martial career. Yes. And you've testified that you're a woman who spent decades presenting as a man. Is that correct? Eleanor saw where this was going. Blackwell would try to suggest she was deceptive by nature, that someone who had hidden their gender could hide anything. I did what was necessary to serve. In 1968, women weren't allowed in combat roles. If I had revealed my gender, I would have been discharged. So you lied about who you were for 50 years. I served my country for 50 years. By lying about your identity, by deceiving your fellow soldiers, your fellow marshals, everyone you worked with. Blackwell leaned against the witness box. Someone who lies about something that fundamental, who maintains a false identity for half a century, could easily lie about other things, couldn't they? Lisa Warren objected, argumentative and irrelevant. Judge Chen sustained the objection, but the damage was done. Blackwell had planted the seed of doubt. He moved on to White Ridge. 7 civilians died that day, 3 children. You were the senior law enforcement officer on scene. You were responsible for their safety. Isn't it true that you made tactical errors that led to their deaths? I made the best decisions I could with the information available. But people died, children died. And rather than face investigation, rather than accept responsibility, you ran, you disappeared for 7 years. I accepted full responsibility. I was investigated by the Marshal Service, the FBI, and the Montana State Police. Every investigation cleared me of wrongdoing. I didn't run from investigation. I ran from the memories. Or you ran because you knew your career was over. You knew that your reputation as the Great Shade had been destroyed. And in those 7 years, you constructed an elaborate revenge plot against the man you blamed for your downfall. Eleanor met his eyes without flinching. Harrison Drake murdered children to destroy me. If you think that's not worth prosecuting, you're welcome to that opinion. But it doesn't change the facts. Blackwell smiled, a thin expression that held no warmth. Facts. Let's talk about facts. You claim to have evidence of Drake's involvement in 5 land wars. But that evidence was stored in your cabin. Your cabin, which conveniently burned down 3 weeks ago. How convenient that the physical documents are gone, leaving only your word that they ever existed. Copies were made. The bank vault in Ashford holds complete documentation. Copies you could have fabricated. There's no way to authenticate documents that supposedly existed for decades but only surfaced when you needed them to support your vendetta. That's not how evidence works. No. Then explain to me how a woman who claims to have been investigating Draken for 5 years somehow failed to report or any of this to her superiors until the moment it became personally advantageous. I was deep cover. Reporting would have compromised the operation. Or there was no operation. Just a woman nursing a grudge and waiting for the opportunity to strike. The cross-examination continued for 3 more hours, Blackwell attacking every aspect of Eleanor's testimony, questioning every decision she had made, suggesting that everything from her gender presentation to her retirement to her investigation was part of an elaborate deception. By the time Eleanor left the stand, she was exhausted, drained by the effort of maintaining composure while Blackwell tried to dismantle her credibility piece by piece. Rebecca found her in the courthouse bathroom, standing over the sink with water running over her hands. "You did well," Rebecca said quietly. "I let him get to me." "No, you stayed calm. You told the truth. That's all you could do." Eleanor dried her hands, studying her reflection in the mirror. The scar running from temple to jaw seemed more prominent in the harsh fluorescent light, a permanent reminder of Vietnam and all the violence that had followed. What if the jury believes him? What if they think I'm just a bitter ex-marshal with an axe to grind? Then we lose, and Drake walks free. Rebecca put her hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "But I don't think we'll lose, because Blackwell made a mistake. He tried to make you look like a liar. But everything you said can be verified. Every claim you made has supporting evidence, and the jury will see that." The trial continued for 2 more weeks. Marcus Stone testified about Drake's manipulation, how he had been fed false information designed to turn him against Catherine Grant. Catherine testified about her husband's death, the mine collapse that Drake had orchestrated and disguised as an accident. Sheriff Tucker described the poison well that started the Ashford riots, presenting forensic evidence that the poison came from chemicals Drake's company had purchased. 47 officials appeared either as witnesses or co-defendants, each one confirming their place in Drake's bribery network. Some tried to minimize their involvement. Others, seeing the mountain of evidence, confessed everything in hopes of reduced sentences. The prosecution presented financial records showing Drake had profited over $300 million from his orchestrated land wars. They showed the pattern: identify valuable resources, create conflict between local factions, wait for casualties to mount, and property values to crash, then sweep in with legal mechanisms that allowed acquisition at pennies on the dollar. It was systematic. It was meticulous. It was monstrous. And through it all, Harrison Drake sat at the defense table with the expression of a man who believed he would somehow escape consequences. He had been rich and powerful for so long that the possibility of genuine accountability seemed incomprehensible to him. On the final day of testimony, the prosecution called their last witness. Not a victim or an accomplice, but a survivor. An elderly Vietnamese woman named Nguyen Thi Mai took the stand with the help of a translator. She was 83 years old, her face deeply lined, her hands trembling as she placed them on the Bible to swear her oath. Through the translator, she described her village in 1968, a small farming community that had tried to remain neutral in the war between North and South. How American forces had come led by a CIA liaison who insisted the village was harboring Viet Cong fighters. How that liaison had ordered the village burned with napalm, residents included. "A young American soldier stopped it," she said through the translator, her voice wavering with age and emotion. "A soldier who spoke our language, who saw that we were farmers, not fighters. This soldier," reported the CIA man, "saved our village, saved my children." I never forgot that soldier's face. Lisa Warren showed her a photograph from 1968. Augustus Gray at 18, standing beside Dr. Miller in combat fatigues. "Is this the soldier who saved your village?" "Yes, that is the one, Augustus Gray, the one with kind eyes." Then Warren showed her a different photograph. Harrison Drake in 1968, young and arrogant, in expensive civilian clothes, standing beside military brass. "And this man? Do you recognize him?" Nguyen Thi Mai's face contorted with remembered fear and hatred. That is the devil who ordered our deaths. The CIA man. He said our lives meant nothing. That dead Vietnamese were good for the war effort. He would have killed us all if Augustus Gray had not stopped him. The courtroom erupted. Judge Chen banged her gavel for order. Drake's lawyers objected strenuously, claiming the testimony was prejudicial and irrelevant to the charges being tried. Judge Chen overruled them. The prosecution has charged the defendant with war crimes. This witness's testimony directly relates to those charges. The objection is denied. Blackwell tried to discredit the witness during cross-examination, suggesting her memory of events 57 years ago could not be reliable, that she might be confusing Drake with someone else, that she had been coached to identify him. But Nguyen Thi Mai remained unshakable. I remember the face of the man who tried to kill my children. You do not forget such things. Memory fades for small matters. For the man who ordered your death, memory remains sharp. Closing arguments began the next morning. Lisa Warren spoke for 3 hours, walking the jury through every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every document that proved Drake's guilt beyond reasonable doubt. Harrison Drake is 75 years old. For 57 of those years, he has profited from the suffering of others. He perfected the art of creating conflict, of turning neighbors into enemies, of making violence seem inevitable, so he could harvest the aftermath. 370 people are dead because of his schemes. Thousands more lost their homes, their livelihoods, their sense of safety. And he did it all for money. Warren's voice rose with controlled passion. The defense would have you believe this is all a conspiracy, that Marshall Hayes fabricated everything out of personal grudge. But ask yourselves, could one person fabricate testimony from 47 different officials? Could one person forge financial records that have been verified by independent auditors? Could one person convince Colonel Foster and Connor Walsh and Marcus Stone and Catherine Grant and a Vietnamese grandmother to all lie consistently about events spanning 50 years? She paused, letting the question hang. No, the only conspiracy here is the one Harrison Drake created. The only deception is the one he practiced. And the only justice is the verdict you must return. Guilty on all counts. Thomas Blackwell's closing argument was a masterwork of misdirection and doubt. The prosecution wants you to believe that my client is a criminal mastermind who orchestrated events across 5 decades with perfect precision. But the evidence actually shows something else, a determined marshal with a personal grudge who spent years building a case based on coincidence and circumstantial evidence. He systematically attacked each piece of evidence, suggesting alternative explanations, pointing out gaps in the timeline, questioning the reliability of every witness who had received reduced sentences or immunity in exchange for testimony. Yes, my client made business acquisitions. Yes, some of those acquisitions occurred in areas that had experienced conflict. But correlation is not causation. Show me one piece of evidence, one document, one recording where Harrison Drake explicitly orders someone to start a war. You can't, because it doesn't exist. Blackwell pointed at Eleanor. What does exist is a career marshal whose reputation was destroyed at White Ridge, who spent 7 years building an elaborate revenge plot, and who has convinced this court to prosecute a respected businessman based on nothing more than suspicion and personal animosity. The jury deliberated for 4 days. 4 days during which Eleanor barely slept, pacing her hotel room at 3 a.m, replaying every moment of her testimony, wondering if she had done enough, said enough, been credible enough. Rebecca stayed with her, a silent presence that kept Eleanor from spiraling too far into doubt. On the 3rd night, as Eleanor stood at the window watching Helena's lights twinkle in the darkness, Rebecca spoke. My father used to say that justice was like farming. You plant seeds, you tend them carefully, you protect them from threats. But ultimately, you have to trust that the soil is good and the sun will shine. You can't force the harvest. You can only do the work and have faith. I'm not good at faith. You have more than you think. You had faith that Ridge Valley could be saved. Faith that Marcus and Catherine could work together. Faith that Foster could be redeemed. All of that faith was justified. This is different. No, it's the same. You did the work. You planted the seeds. Now we wait for the harvest. On the morning of the 4th day, word came that the jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom filled quickly, the same crowd as before, but now tense with anticipation rather than expectation. Eleanor sat in the front row between Rebecca and Governor Knox, her hands folded calmly in her lap, despite the hurricane of anxiety churning in her gut. Judge Chen entered. The jury filed in 12 faces, carefully neutral, giving nothing away. Eleanor tried to read them and failed. Jury members who had spent 4 days together locked in a room debating the fate of a man accused of crimes spanning 5 decades. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Chen asked. The foreman, a middle-aged man who had been a school teacher before being called for jury duty, stood. We have your honor. Please hand the verdict form to the bailiff. The next 30 seconds felt like hours. The bailiff walked the form to Judge Chen. She read it without expression, then handed it back to the bailiff, who returned it to the foreman. In the matter of United States versus Harrison Drake on the charge of racketeering, how do you find guilty? The courtroom exploded with noise. Judge Chen's gavel cracked like gunshots. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, how do you find guilty? On the charge of fraud affecting interstate commerce, how do you find guilty? 37 charges, 37 guilty verdicts. Not a single acquittal. Harrison Drake's face went ashen. His lawyers began talking rapidly, filing motions for mistrial, for appeal, for anything that might delay the inevitable. But Judge Chen denied each motion with swift efficiency. Sentencing will be held 1 week from today. The defendant will remain in custody without bail. This court stands adjourned. Eleanor sat frozen as chaos erupted around her. People cheering, crying, embracing. Journalists rushing to file stories. Drake being led away in chains, his shoulders slumped in defeat, the arrogance finally stripped away to reveal the frightened old man beneath. Rebecca hugged her. Governor Knox clasped her shoulder. Marcus Stone, who had traveled from Ridge Valley to hear the verdict, shook her hand with tears in his eyes. You did it, he said. You actually did it. Eleanor found her voice. We did it. All of us together. Because it had not been just her victory. It had been Ridge Valley's victory. Every person who had testified. Every official who had cooperated. Every citizen who had refused to let Drake's manipulation destroy their community. 1 week later, Judge Chen sentenced Harrison Drake to 420 years in federal prison, the sentences to run consecutively rather than concurrently. Additionally, all of Drake's assets were forfeited, $2.3 million paid in restitution to victims across 5 territories, and his various shell companies dissolved. Drake would die in prison. There would be no parole, no early release, no redemption. He was 75 years old, and he would spend whatever time remained to him behind bars, forgotten by everyone except those he had victimized. As the marshals led him away one final time, Drake looked at Eleanor with something that might have been respect or might have been hatred. You won, but it doesn't change anything. Men like me are everywhere. You can't stop them all. Eleanor held his gaze. No, but I can stop the ones I find, and I can teach others to do the same. Senator Gerald Hawkins was convicted in a separate trial 2 months later, receiving a 15-year sentence for accepting bribes and obstructing justice. 12 of the 47 officials on Drake's bribery list accepted plea deals and received reduced sentences in exchange for testimony. The remaining 35 went to trial and were convicted. The corruption network that had enabled Drake's empire crumbled, replaced by officials chosen in special elections held across Montana and 4 other states. Ridge Valley became a model for how communities could heal from manufactured conflicts. The mining cooperative exceeded all projections, generating $30 million in profit in its first year alone. 40% went to the community fund, which built a new school, expanded the hospital, and established a community center where residents from formerly opposing factions gathered to rebuild relationships torn apart by Drake's manipulation. Marcus Stone, having tasted redemption, became one of the cooperative's most effective advocates. He traveled to the other 4 territories Drake had victimized, sharing Ridge Valley's story, helping other communities establish their own cooperative models. The man who had once ruled through fear and intimidation now led through example and generosity. Catherine Grant used her share of the profits to expand her freight operations, creating jobs for veterans and former criminals who needed second chances. She partnered with Pinkerton to establish training programs for women interested in security work, personally mentoring a dozen young women who wanted to follow in Rebecca Cole's footsteps. And Eleanor Hayes, the woman who had spent 5 years hiding what she was, stepped fully into the light. Governor Knox appointed her as Special Territorial Marshal, a new position created specifically for her skills. The job gave her authority to investigate corruption across Montana and coordinate with federal agencies on cases that cross state lines. It was in many ways the job she had always been meant to do. Enough authority to make a difference, enough autonomy to operate according to her conscience. But the most important work happened on her rebuilt plateau. 6 months after Drake's conviction, Eleanor opened the Iron Ridge Marshal Training Academy. The facility was small, just a dozen students at a time, but the standards were rigorous and the philosophy revolutionary. Instead of focusing primarily on combat skills and legal procedure, the academy emphasized de-escalation, community building, and the principle that law enforcement existed to protect rather than to punish. A marshal's job is not to kill bad guys, Eleanor told her first class of students on opening day. It's to protect good people. Sometimes that requires violence. But violence should always be the last resort, never the first. And when you do use force, you carry the weight of that decision for the rest of your life. Every person you shoot, every life you take leaves a mark. You'll see their faces in your dreams, hear their last words in quiet moments. The goal is to minimize those moments while still doing what must be done. Finn Baker was the Academy's first student enrolled on his 16th birthday with his mother's blessing and Eleanor's pride. The boy who had ridden his mare up the mountain to warn Eleanor of Ashford's chaos had grown into a young man with his father's courage and his mentor's wisdom. Eleanor taught him everything Tom Cole had taught her: how to read people rather than just evidence, how to de-escalate confrontations with words before resorting to weapons, how to see the humanity in everyone, even those who had lost their way, how to balance mercy with justice, understanding that both were necessary for true peace. Rebecca Cole became the Academy's second instructor, teaching investigation techniques, surveillance, and the infiltration skills that had made her one of Pinkerton's top operatives. She moved into a cabin adjacent to Eleanor's, close enough to work together, but far enough to maintain independence. Their partnership deepened over the months following Drake's trial. Not romantic, despite what some townspeople speculated, but something equally profound. They were sisters in every way that mattered, bound by shared purpose and mutual respect. Rebecca was the daughter Eleanor had never had. Eleanor was the mentor Rebecca's father had been before his death. Together, they taught the next generation that law enforcement could be something better than what it had been. Something more than badges and guns and the authority to inflict violence on those deemed deserving. They taught that marshals could be protectors, mediators, and builders of the peace they were sworn to maintain. The Academy graduated its first class 2 years after opening. 12 students, all of them trained in Eleanor's philosophy of protection over punishment. They dispersed across Montana and neighboring states, taking positions in sheriff's departments and federal agencies, quietly changing the culture of law enforcement, one precinct at a time. Finn Baker, at 18, became the youngest deputy marshal in Montana history. He worked alongside Eleanor on cases that required both her experience and his technological savvy. The boy had grown into a skilled investigator with a gift for connecting with people that Eleanor recognized as surpassing her own abilities. "You're better at this than I ever was," she told him after he successfully negotiated the surrender of an armed fugitive without firing a single shot. "You taught me everything I know." "No, I taught you what I know. What you do with that knowledge is your own creation." Eleanor studied him with pride. "Your father would be proud of you. I am proud of you." Finn's eyes glistened. "Sometimes I wonder what he'd think of all this. The Academy, the work we do, if he'd approve." He'd approve. Tom Cole believed that law enforcement should be about protecting people, but not just punishing criminals. That's exactly what you're doing. That's what we're all doing now. 5 years after Harrison Drake's conviction, Ridge Valley had transformed beyond recognition. The town had tripled in size as word spread about the mining cooperative and the opportunities it created. The population reached 5,000, a mix of original residents and newcomers, attracted by the promise of fair wages, ethical business practices, and a community that prioritized people over profit. The lithium mining operation generated $8 billion in revenue over those 5 years, creating 2,400 jobs and establishing Ridge Valley as one of Montana's most prosperous towns. But prosperity had not corrupted the community's values. The cooperative structure ensured that wealth was distributed fairly, that environmental regulations were strictly enforced, and that the land itself was treated with respect rather than simply exploited for profit. Marcus Stone, now 63, had become one of Montana's most respected philanthropists. He donated $50 million to state education programs, established scholarships for children from low-income families, and spent much of his time mentoring young entrepreneurs who wanted to build ethical businesses. He married Mara Reed, the woman who owned the general store, and they adopted 3 children orphaned by the conflicts that had swept through neighboring territories. Catherine Grant, 47, and serving in the Montana State Senate, became a leading advocate for corporate transparency and ethical mining practices. Her legislation establishing mandatory third-party auditing for resource extraction companies passed with bipartisan support, creating a model that other states began to adopt. She never remarried, dedicating herself instead to public service and to building a legacy that honored her late husband's memory. Jack Garrett, once Marcus Stone's chief enforcer and a man who had nearly killed Eleanor on their first meeting, was now the cooperative's head of security. His redemption had been complete and genuine. He trained his security force in de-escalation techniques, strictly forbidding the kind of intimidation tactics that he had once employed routinely. He also volunteered at the community center mentoring at-risk youth who reminded him of his younger self. Dr. Benjamin Miller, now 78, had officially retired from medical practice, but served as a consultant at the new hospital and taught first aid courses at Eleanor's Academy. He spent his evenings writing a memoir about his experiences in Vietnam, determined to record the truth about what had happened there before memory faded entirely. Colonel Daniel Foster, released after serving 3 years of a reduced sentence, relocated to Ridge Valley with his wife and daughters. He worked as a consultant for the cooperative, using his military expertise to establish safety protocols for the mining operations. He also taught classes at Eleanor's Academy on tactical decision-making and the ethics of following orders. His daughters, now in their 20s, had both chosen careers in public service, determined to balance their father's past mistakes with their own contributions to society. And Eleanor Hayes, 80 years old and finally comfortable in her own skin, stood on the porch of her rebuilt cabin, watching the sun set over the valley she had spent a decade protecting. The scars remained. Vietnam, White Ridge, the 27 faces that still visited her dreams. But they were balanced now by other memories. The students she had trained, the lives she had saved, the community she had helped rebuild. Rebecca joined her on the porch, 2 cups of chamomile tea in hand. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the valley lights begin to twinkle as darkness settled over the mountains. "Governor Knox called," Rebecca said. "He wants you to investigate a situation in Wyoming. Possible land fraud, similar pattern to what Drake used." Eleanor sipped her tea, considering. "What do you think?" "I think we have 12 students who could use practical field experience. And I think you're not quite ready to retire again." "Am I that transparent?" "You're restless. You've been restless for weeks. Teaching is important, but it's not enough. You need to do the work too." Eleanor smiled. Rebecca knew her better than anyone understood that she would never be entirely content sitting still. The work called to her the way it always had, the drive to protect people who could not protect themselves. "Wyoming, then. We'll take Finn and 3 other students. Make it a teaching mission." "Already told Knox you'd say yes. We leave Monday." And they stood together, watching night claim the valley, 2 women who had found purpose in protection and meaning in mentorship. The shade had returned, but she had returned as something more than a ghost. She had returned as a teacher, a builder, a creator of the future she wanted to see. Somewhere in federal prison, Harrison Drake was dying slowly. His empire dismantled, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale about the consequences of unchecked greed. Somewhere in Washington, corrupt officials who had once seemed untouchable were serving sentences that would keep them behind bars for decades. And here in Ridge Valley, a community that had nearly torn itself apart had instead chosen to heal, to build, to create something better than what came before. Eleanor's hand moved unconsciously to the badge pinned over her heart. Number 247, a badge she had worn with honor, shame, pride, and regret. But now finally she wore it with something approaching peace. The work was not finished. It would never be finished. There would always be more corruption, to expose more conflicts, to resolve more people who needed protection from those who saw them as obstacles or opportunities, rather than human beings deserving of dignity. But for tonight, Eleanor Hayes allowed herself to believe that the work was good, that the fight was worth fighting, and that the ghosts who followed her were joined now by enough spirits of hope that the balance had finally tipped toward light rather than darkness. The sun finished its descent, and the valley embraced the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight Ridge Valley was at peace. And Eleanor Hayes, the woman who had spent 5 decades learning to balance justice with mercy, violence with restraint, punishment with redemption, stood watch over the home she had built from ashes and determination. The last marshal of Iron Ridge, no longer hiding what she was, no longer running from what she had been, finally comfortable with what she had become. A weapon that had learned to be a tool, a killer who had learned to be a protector, a ghost who had learned to be human. The legend of Shade would endure, passed down through generations of marshals trained in her methods, teaching that true strength lay not in the ability to destroy, but in the wisdom to know when destruction was necessary and the courage to choose mercy whenever possible. Eleanor smiled into the darkness, raised her cup in silent toast to Tom Cole and all the others who had taught her these lessons, and whispered words that were both prayer and promise. "I'll keep watch, always." And she would. Until the day came when younger hands could take up the responsibility, when the students she trained were ready to protect the next generation, Eleanor Hayes would stand guard over the valley that had given her back her purpose, her peace, and her soul. The work continued. The harvest had come, and in the end that was enough.